I am here with the 16th ranked DFS player in the world, according to the Roto Grinders rankings. You probably know him by now. He's done plenty of podcasts, but Daniel Hutchings here, Nerdy Tenor, has been crushing basically every DFS sport that you can think of for a few years now. It's been you were new when we first talked a couple years ago on high stakes. Now you've been around a little while. A little while. You are a wily veteran. Really excited to catch up with Daniel for the first time, face to face in a couple years. We've talked a little bit offline, but first time face to face in a couple years here. So Daniel, really excited to get you back on the show. And of course, we need to talk about Daniel recently launched along with a group of people. It wasn't just Daniel's project, but Daniel along with Brick 75. Adam Scher, and Utica launched the Endgame Syndicate. That should be coming out soon. Really excited to hear more about that. Daniel, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well. I'm glad to have an excuse to talk about fantasy and drink some beer while I do it. So,
Yeah, you want to give a shout out? You said it's a great brewery
yes,
just
this
down
is
the
my
road.
local, my hyper local brewery, Old 121, Lakewood, Colorado.
Very
Visit
nice.
it if you're in town. Really nice people too. Good beer.
I am drinking boxed wine.
Mm.
Giant glass of boxed wine is my drink of choice for the night.
Boxed wine has made leaps and bounds in the last 15 years or so, I'm told. Like, you can actually get good stuff now.
I know that's the thing. It
Yeah.
gets a bad rap, and a lot of people are still like stuck to the stigma, like, oh, I can't drink box wine, it's not good. And then I hear like actual like knowledgeable wine people tell me that it's actually really good now, and I can't tell the difference anyway. I enjoy it, so might as well go for the cheap boxed wine. Keep it in the fridge. I like it quite a bit. Um, so Daniel, I know you live in uh, Colorado now, or sorry, you lived in Colorado last time we talked. So I guess I'll ask you: are you still in Colorado now?
Still here. Um, Yeah, I moved here 14 years ago, and we like it here. I think we're going to stay here. Um,
Well,
yeah,
that sort of
same.
answers my half answers my second question, which is so you're not from there originally. It sounds like where are you from originally? And then of course I also like to know any biases you have, any athletes or teams that you're a big fan of.
Well, I grew up in New York, and then I went to school in Ohio, and then I went to work in California, and then from there moved here. So I don't really have any loyalties. I'm also not a huge sports fan. My wife is a huge Broncos fan. God bless her. Poor
Okay.
thing. Um, she caught the bug. I am somewhat of a football watcher, even though the product is often quite terrible. Um, and but I do enjoy watching playoff basketball, even though I don't know much about it honestly. But it's really exciting, and even from someone who doesn't know a lot about the game, you can tell the intensity is like readily apparent when you watch those games, especially on defense. Like, to me, that seems, just from a like rank amateur viewer, that's like night and day. Is how intensely they play defense.
For sure. I was gonna say, so you're not claiming any kind of Nuggets fandom. You did say congrats to the T Wolves bastard to me. So you got to be at least a little bit of a Nuggets fan. You were
Well, we,
cheering for the
we
Nuggets at
do
least.
like to root on the home teams just on principle, and they're fun to watch. You know, heat pads thrown onto the court, notwithstanding. Uh, yeah, I think I saw three of the games. I did not see the horrible blowout, mercifully. Um, yeah, but you must be flying high now. You
I
got
mean, yeah, not as high as we were before last night. Last night, my friend and I were at the game. Went to the game last night. My friend and I were there, and early throughout the first half, he was like, "Man, the vibes are just so good right now. Just like it feels like the Timberwolves are going to win this series." And it felt like they played well enough and lost the game one. So now the vibes are a little bit lower after seeing the Timberwolves lose to the Mavs in game one. But yeah, certainly better than any of us expected coming into the playoffs, or better than I expected. I guess can't speak for everybody, but was not expecting the Timberwolves to make the Western Conference Finals. I thought, getting the Suns in the first round, it was like, this is so Timberwolves. They were finally really good this year. Now they get a matchup with a super team in the Suns. So yeah, to beat the Suns and the Nuggets, definitely not expected for me.
Yeah, pretty
Pretty
cool.
excited about that. All right, so no major fandoms that are going to that bias you in your process, anything like that.
Not
Um,
really.
So last time we talked, which was again a couple of years ago, you had sort of just started. Like I asked you if you were a DFS pro, and at that time you were like, "Yeah, I guess I am." Like you kind of had just become a DFS pro. Is that still your primary occupation? Has it been this whole time?
It is. I could say it's primary. It's my primary way of making money
Yeah.
right now because I don't know if you know this, but the classical music business is not especially lucrative. So, um, yeah, um, yeah, it is for now. We'll see how long that lasts. I mean, games get tougher over time, as we all know. So I don't anticipate doing it forever, but it's what I'm doing for the short term at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and you obviously have had a lot of success. I know you just recently got second place in the Tournament of Champions, and I couldn't remember. I didn't go back and find how did you get into the Tournament of Champions in the first
It
place?
was because I won the hockey championship.
Okay, and what was that 100,000 at first, or how much
No,
was it
that
for
was
hockey?
200 to
Oh,
first.
nice.
And then, but if you do the math, the ticket to the Tournament of Champions is worth 80K.
Yeah,
So it's like a huge port if for the smaller finals, like the ticket is like a huge part of the prize. Um,
yeah.
I think MMA was it was the biggest. It was like I don't even remember what the top prize was, maybe 150.
Okay,
Like somebody could remind me. And then this like $80,000 ticket also. So
right.
yeah, but they're not going to do it anymore. That was the last
I
one,
know. Yep.
which I kind of get. But it was fun. Um, I had a good time. I brought my father and stepmother with me, which was super fun. They had never
And
seen anything like that. So
you also got second place for $250,000 there, which definitely makes it more fun. Most of us have not had that kind of stuff. Was that your first live final?
no, I mean, well, I mean, there was the hockey one to get into it, and
Right.
then I've done. Let's see. I've done two FanDuel baseballs. I've done DraftKings hockey, baseball, and golf. I think
Okay.
those are the ones I've done. And then I'll be doing both baseballs again this year. I actually won my ticket for FanDuel and DraftKings on the same day, which is kind of
Are
crazy.
are those tournaments on the same day also? Like, do they happen
No,
on
no,
the same
no.
day? Oh, nice.
They're careful not to schedule on top of each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty smart. So where have you gone for these live finals since you've been to so many?
Okay. Golf was in Memphis. Um, one baseball was in Chicago. One was in San Diego. One was in Philadelphia. And then hockey was out here in Denver, which was kind of one of the reasons I tried to get in because I knew if I got tickets, I could bring people. So I got 3 tickets to that. I brought
Oh,
my
cool.
wife and her friends. And then my cousin who lives out here and his wife are like super duper hockey people. Um, like he played until well into his 60s in a seniors league. Um, and his wife, um, her dad was one of the team doctors for years and years. I think I can't remember exactly which team. So they're like totally steeped in hockey, and I got to bring them. So that was really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that's very cool. Getting to do right there. I've thought about whether that would be a bonus or a negative for me if it were in Minnesota, having a live final here. I feel like because I'm in Minnesota, maybe it would be like I'd rather go somewhere warm in the winter. Um,
sure.
but yeah, I can see the appeal of having it in your hometown also, and also just an excuse to get into another live final because you seem to be. Have you had any other success at the live finals besides the second place in the TOC?
Well, the hockey one I won, and the second in TOC,
Yeah, right,
and
right.
then nothing exciting.
I mean
Um,
that's pretty damn good though. Getting first
no,
in
I am
hockey and then getting
thrilled.
second in the TOC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely running above expectation. There's no question about it. So.
And those, how have you found it with the lack of late swap in the TOC? I mean, was that kind of tough for you, or is that do you like not having late swap there?
It's just different. I had to do some special stuff for that. So um, I think for hockey, I think I did this for hockey and for baseball. It's not an issue with golf because everything locks anyway, uh, just like it normally would. But I basically had to um, for baseball and hockey, you have the same problem. You have um, it's sort of like injury risk, but it's lineup risk. So you don't have all the lineups out.
Right.
So you need to shake on some kind of probability that this late player is not going to play. So I kind of hacked something together to just, my goal was to get something that was just better than doing nothing about it.
Sure.
And so I assigned some probability that this guy playing 3 hours from now is not going to play, and just baked that into the methodology I use.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
worked out pretty well. Has worked out pretty well for you in general. So you said, as you said, Tournament of Champions not happening anymore. How did you feel? How was your experience? And like, do you feel like they missed an opportunity there? Like I always felt like with the Tournament of Champions, they could have made this a big marketing opportunity. And of course, I've actually talked to several different DraftKings people who have said the same thing. They all seem to think the same thing. Like we should have made this a big marketing opportunity, and then they just didn't. Do you think it was a big missed opportunity there, or do you think there's just kind of a limit to what they can do?
I don't know. I mean, I'd just be guessing. I just from the outside, it seems like marketing fantasy is just not really on anybody's priority list. So I feel like it's just another instance of that, where it's just like, you know, this product is making us money, we'll keep it going, but like it's not where all the action is. That's just my rough take on it.
Yeah.
Um, I've talked to a lot of DraftKings employees. They're really great and like enthusiastic, and have lots of cool ideas. But I have no insight into like what higher ups are deciding what should be
Right.
done. But yeah, I mean, all those people are pretty cool and gung ho about stuff. So
Yeah, I've always found that too. Like it seems like it's like generally the employees are pretty sharp. Like I've always enjoyed my conversations with DraftKings employees. They're all like clearly like bought in. Like they're thinking about the way that they can
yeah,
improve products and stuff like that. So yeah, I've had good experiences generally talking with DraftKings people. They all seem like good people.
yeah,
Um, so I kind of wanted to just catch up on some of the things that we talked about last time. We're going to do a little bit of a different interview here because I already interviewed you and asked you like most of my default questions a couple of years ago, and some of them like the answer hasn't changed. So I kind of want to just like catch up on some of those things what I really want to hear about is the Endgame Syndicate. Really excited to see
sure.
where this project goes because it's a lot of people that I really respect within the industry. Really excited to see where you take it. But I kind of wanted to start talking about your DFS experience over the past couple of years, how things may have changed for you. So you told me in our last interview that you were striving to play something close to a balanced approach rather than exploitative, and that is something that, as we discussed, is I think a little bit different than the way most DFS pros play. That you were kind of striving to be balanced. However, you reserve the right to become exploitative in that conversation. I'm curious if you have changed that at all. Have you tried to become more exploitative over time, or are you just happy to be a kind of a balanced player?
So the answer is it depends on the sport and the contest, and there's a lot there actually. Um, since we talked, I've done a lot of not a lot. I've done like three major projects to try and improve how I do things. One of them was hugely successful. The other one was kind of meh, and then one like didn't work at all. And um, the one that didn't work at all was trying to figure out how to exploit the field in an automated fashion. Um,
Okay.
so basically, so my impression is the same as yours, that most competitive players, like players you don't want to see in your contest, that's what I call a competitive player. Doesn't have to be like Utica level, but just
Right.
like anybody good. Like almost all of them are targeting inefficiencies specifically, right?
Yep.
Um, the vast majority of them are, and I think I've been very stubborn about my approach, where like I want my process to figure out everything. Like I never want to be making judgment calls, because I'm just naturally lazy and stupid. No, well, that's part of it, but also just like it sort of forces me to try and improve things through my process rather than making choices that I'm afraid I might justify to myself that may or may not be good. So that's a strong sort of methodological bias I have. So I was like, well, is there a way I can study fields in a smart way and then adapt my process? And I had a couple really promising ideas, and I spent quite a lot of time on them, and they did not work. So I have to go back to that at some point. I think it's a really fascinating problem from an engineering perspective. And I do have a lot of ideas there, but one thing I did work on was getting late swap better, and that was pretty successful. Um, I do feel like I came up with a pretty good approach.
For which for NBA or for like what sports are you talking about?
For all kinds of sports.
Okay.
So I have sort of a generalized framework for how to do that. Um, and then there's just a lot of nitty gritty details on a per sport basis. So so the season before this one, as you all know, NBA and hockey overlap, and I think to do DFS well, you kind of have to pick at most one of the two because the games are overlapping and there's swapping. Maybe some lunatic out there does both. I'm not crazy enough to do that. And so, the season before I did hockey, and I was like, I'm going to come back to basketball, give it a try. It's kind of a tough time to come back to basketball. I think it's a very tough DFS sport, but it was a good crucible for sort of like how does one do late swap intelligently, just in general. And I think I have something pretty good there. Is it good enough to be competitive? I don't have enough data to know the answer to that. I think, but it's definitely better than what I was doing before, for sure.
So, well, before I ask my next question, I got to say, yeah, I think most of us do think of you as being stupid and lazy. I think is how most of us would describe you, the same way you describe yourself. Lundar says, if this gen is stupid, where am I on the bell curve? Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of feel that way as Nerdy calls himself lazy and stupid. That's
Well,
those are, it's a funny way to describe you.
well, sometimes I mean, sometimes the laziness can be strategic, right? It's
That's true. Laziness makes you more efficient.
it can motivate you to do some tooling. Like, this is a stupid example. So I have this, I among other things, I'm always trying to check out new games. So I'm playing around with Rainmaker's Golf. Okay, so for people who don't know, this is where you have collectible trading cards that you buy, and then you use them to enter contests, which are quote unquote free, but you paid for it by buying the cards. So
DraftKings
it's
product.
it's yeah, it's related to DFS, but it's a little different because instead of salaries, you have market prices, which so it's kind of tricky. Well, so I'm doing this at low stakes for various reasons, just to test it out. And so I almost every week I have lineups in the lowest two-tier of contests, and I'm a typical week I make $200 or something, but and I'm doing it because the game is interesting and I sort of proof of concept. But I had this thing where like I was constantly having to trim my pool of golfers to make my software more efficient because it would eventually figure out how to trim out the worst golfers, but it would take forever for it to get pruned out of the pool. And I'm like copying this file and I'm like manually removing entries and I'm doing this week after week. I'm like, oh, this is so boring. I'm not doing this. And I'm like, you idiot. It's like spent half an hour, coded up something that did the thing I was manually doing for the past, 5 weeks. And now I never have to do that again. So like, that's sort of the kind of laziness motivation that you get. It's like, I do not want to deal with this stupid thing again.
Okay, so I have follow-up questions. My first question though is, do you think you're the nittiest DFS player on the planet? Because before you got like super into DFS, you were like, okay, I'm not going to enter regular stake. I'm going to play like the lowest stakes just to test my process. And now you're doing the same thing all over again, even though you've won hundreds of thousands of so much money playing DFS. You're still going back to the Rainmaker lowest tier cheap stuff. Is that just you being nitty, or what's the motivation for not just diving right in?
I don't think I'm super nitty. If you look at my volume, it's
Well, that's true. Good point. That's fair.
But
You're
I do have
cautious.
to acknowledge, hello, my name is Dan, and I'm a nit. I do have some of that. I think it's partly that. Also, frankly, and this is sort of an unpleasant reason, the tax situation with
Yeah.
rainmakers is pretty uh, vague and
Yep.
a little bit troubling. So I don't want to expose myself to any sort of like major liability there.
Yeah.
Like I think if I lived in Canada, I would be playing it probably more aggressively than I do now.
Okay. Yeah. That makes
But
sense.
it's not just that it's nittiness. It's like it's a ton of work to do it. Like it's a pain in the ass in the way that in a way that DFS is not, because you're like managing inventory and you're trading cards and you're like, okay, I have this hole in my lineup and I got to enter all these things. It's sort of, it's not really meant, it's not designed to be scaled up, really, not really.
So that was going to be my follow-up question is why the hell are you getting into Rainmakers? Because to me, Rainmakers is, and maybe I'm wrong, but like it's, especially for PGA, don't you just like play the top project, like buy the top projected players and play their cards? I mean, obviously, I guess there's still an ownership component to it, all that kind of stuff, but it's just like you could just play like the top six projected golfers, I think, for maybe I'm wrong about that, for Rainmakers. So there's not like, it's not a super interesting game to me from a game theory perspective, and there's like limits on how much you can win. And why are you spending time on Rainmakers, I guess is my question.
I think it's because I think the game is more interesting than that. I
Okay.
actually do think there is some there from a game perspective. Um, I think it's a cool format. Um, Tax issues ignored. Just the game part, I think, is actually kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, but I'm not really doing it because I think I'm going to personally make a lot of money at it. Um, I think it would be more likely, and this is just a vague idea, to do content around it or provide tools around it.
Okay.
If I
That makes
were to
sense.
try to make money off of it, that's how I would. Like it wouldn't be like
Out of your play, it would be out of your
I'm
teaching
gonna
other people.
buy $250,000 of golf cards and just
Okay.
I can't imagine doing something like that personally.
Right.
But I do think the game is interesting. I think um, yeah, there's some subtleties there for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of PGA specifically too. Like obviously, like NFL, other sports, there's more to it than just play the top projected. But for PGA, I guess it is. I don't know, because all it really is just like ownership versus cost to buy in. I guess I don't know. Maybe I guess
Yeah,
I'll have to listen to. You're going to put out a lot of content. It sounds like, so I'll have to listen to what you have to say about Rainmakers, and then maybe I'll change my mind and buy into PGA Rainmakers. It's just that's the one sport that I'm like, man, that seems like PGA Rainmakers is. It feels to me like there wouldn't be as much game theory. It's just like, I mean, it's just ownership versus projection essentially, but I'm
there
sure
are
you
some
you can
things
tell me that
about
there's more to it
there's some things about lineup construction that actually matter.
in PGA. Okay.
Yeah, I think there are. I'm not super confident, but I think I figured out at least a couple things that are interesting. Um, but
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I just really like going after games. Like a new game to me is just fun to go after. It's um, yeah, I've been playing around with battle royale drafts on
I was going to
Underdog.
ask you about that. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not happy. I'm not happy to hear that you're
right.
getting into the
So I
battle
can
royale.
I'm going to set your mind at ease here. So again, much like Rainmakers, I have no in realistic path by which I just like crush drafts, because drafts are sort of inherently not scalable. They're If you enjoy drafting, it's great, but it's a pain in the ass. It takes a lot of time, and I think my take is, and I don't have any inside information, I'm just guessing, but my take is that the sites like Underdog and others are going to make sure that you can't just, deploy a program and have it draft for you. Like
Sure.
they don't want that, and I think they shouldn't want that, and that's correct to not want that. So I again, like if I do something there, it's going to be more about content and tools than me trying to like just crush. I mean, I
Yeah.
will because I'm addicted to games, and like I've been entering sort of low level baseball contests and NBA stuff just to test stuff. So if you see me in your draft, like it's like easy money. Like you'll see me do some really weird shit, and a lot of the weird shit is probably bad. Um, but I'm trying to figure it out. Um,
So I guess my follow up comment to that would be, first of all, I mean, people like myself who love the draft games, the hope, I think, the dream for people like myself, like the bad bros, those of us who love the draft games, is that it will eventually get to a point where those games are big enough where it would be worth the time for people like yourself.
uh,
The prizes are big enough that it's like, okay, now I am gonna spend the time. Don't, from that perspective, don't love you getting involved, but also don't love you teaching other people how to play exactly. But with that said, I am curious with MLB. So one thing that I've always thought is people don't stack enough, but I also have no basis. Like I'm not like looking at contest files. It's just like people in my rooms. I'm like, man, it seems like nobody really stacks in MLB games. Have you been like back testing what actually works? Or is that something that you're still kind of working on?
I'm still trying to figure out. I think it's hopeless to backtest any of this because I don't have access to the data I need. Um, so the stacking is really fascinating. So um, this is all very preliminary,
Yeah.
and it might come. This might segue into our discussion about the venture I'm doing.
Yeah.
But so I do feel like I have a pretty good top level framework for how to do something like battle royale. So I have an understanding of how to approach that and how to make that better. So that's, as a developer, and I hate to use the word researcher because it sounds more pretentious than I intend, but like that's what you want. You're like, okay, I see like there's like a runway where I can see how it will get better over time. Like that is pretty clear to me. So that part is quite promising. Um,
Sorry,
how
when you say it will get better over time, do you mean like your program or like the contest will change?
I mean the program itself.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
I have enough development runway in front of me that I think I can improve things
Okay.
pretty steadily. But so to your question about stacking, so the program I have now, it's quite interesting. Sometimes it will aggressively go for stacking, and other times it won't. And I'm not sure how much is just random noise and how much is it's learned that in this particular draft, my prospects for stacking are no longer good enough to be worth going after. So then, like, it'll pivot to just taking a bunch of highly projected guys and maybe a couple that have an ownership discount. So you'll see, like, 3 or 4 elite hitters and then like one wild card and a strong pitcher. But I'm guessing now, like, I don't really know why it's doing what it's doing yet. Um, but I imagine it has a lot to do with the lineups it thinks it's going to be facing in the contest at large. So it's like an ownership consideration. Um, but I still have a ton of work to do. These contests are really hard to approach, even like just like a 4-game MLB slate. It's quite complicated to try and effectively solve it from first principles is what I'm trying to do. I'm
Okay.
trying to write something that the computer can figure out and just sort of bootstrap itself into a good strategy, and that's really it's pretty gnarly. Um, even if even if what I said earlier is true, like I have sort of broad based principles that I think are pretty sound. Like the nitty gritty of it is no joke, and just to set other people's mind at ease for things like BBM5, like that's just a monstrously complicated thing,
Hmm.
just gigantic contest. You have to do this the right way, you have to simulate the entire season. So you have
Right.
to simulate what's the chance that this rookie turns into a star, like for every player that anyone drafts, like to do this well. Um, I think that that's going to be safe from computers for a pretty long time. I would say.
I just looked up BBMDB to see you from last year. From what I can see, Nerdy Tenor did not enter any lineups
No,
into BBM4. Is that correct?
that sounds right. Yeah.
Is that I know you've been more and more in the underdog streets. Have you been getting into best ball at all?
I've just been doing the daily drafts,
Okay.
and I've been using it as sort of like a test bed for some stuff I'm working on. So just real world, like, oh, what does it do? What does it say I should do? I don't always do what it tells me to do, but it's slow, and I'm scrupulous about following the rules. So I'm entering these all by hand. Like every draft you see me in, that is me at the computer clicking away with the rest of us. I'm just like running some programs to figure some stuff out at the same time.
Okay.
Um,
So
so
you
yeah,
do have your program in front of you telling you what it thinks you should do, but you're making the decision of what you have to do.
right. And in many cases, it's giving me a menu of options. So it might say, oh, you could pick any one of these four batters. They're all about the same EV. Go to town.
Yeah.
Pick one at random.
So interesting to hear about your program and approach to stacking. I've kind of wondered if that is why drafters have gone away from stacking in general, because I assume that when people started, they were all of the mindset of like, we need to be stacking, and then they got sniped on a few picks and it's like, all right, I guess I'm pivoting. And then that it's kind of become, I think, the commonplace is like, I'm going to do a 2-3 stack, or like a three-man stack and then a couple one-offs. Really interesting to see the way the game like seems to be evolving, just because like you can't just play who you want, because other people
Right.
might take the player that you want to get. Yeah, I've also had the consideration of like, well, there's no salary, so like that's the difference between DFS and the draft. I mean, in a sense, there's obviously ADP, so like sort of a salary kind of thing, but like, so I kind of so I've wondered like, so maybe stacking doesn't make as much sense if you can just play like the top batters available a lot of the time.
Right.
Super interesting.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Like, and I see it doing all these things. I'm like, oh wow, it's so cool. It figured this out. And then I'm like, oh no, actually that's bad and random. Like I don't even know to trust what it's doing yet. I still have a lot of work to do there. But one thing I thought about a lot that's really fascinating dynamic in baseball is like um, you can paradoxically have a situation, I think, where some of the best bats from the best teams are actually a little bit less attractive because you almost never get to stack them because
Right.
everybody else is picking them.
Yep.
So like in theory, you're like, oh, this great batter, I gotta get the Phillies today. And then by the time it comes around to you, the top four Phillies are gone. And you're like, well, now I just have a Philly one off, whoop de doo.
If the
Which
Braves
might
are in
be,
Coors Field, it's like they're going to be 4 of the first 6 picks, and it's like, okay, I definitely
yeah.
can't stack this team. Do I draft them anyway? Yeah,
So
big
it's
time.
really interesting. I have seen my stuff like, and the other thing that's really funny, and I'm sure maybe I could ask you about this. Like, I frequently had the situation where the far and away best, most popular pick, so that it's getting picked first, like in 80% of the drafts.
Yep.
My stuff thinks it should be picked like fourth. And so
Huh.
I never get it. I never get to draft that guy if I'm doing what my software says I should be doing. And so every once in a while, I'm like, fuck it. I'm just going to get one. So I have
Yeah.
one because I'm never going to get him otherwise. Do you find this in best ball generally, where there's just certain players who are just
Oh yeah.
so
100. Yeah.
overrated that you have to draft a few, even though you don't like it, just to get access to them? Do you?
I do a ton of that in basketball. I mean, I can think of
Okay.
like off the top of my head, George Pickens. Like he's like, you look at any of the ranking systems that I use, his like ranking will be 20 spots after his ADP for best ball. But I'm like, I don't want to have zero George Pickens. So then I
Yeah.
try and take him. I'm going to get to 3% or something like that. I'm not going to get to the 8.5% that would be like, an even amount, but I'm going to be just a little bit, because you don't want to full fade those people generally, or at least I don't. Like I know some people will just be like, if he doesn't come up, he doesn't come up. I'm going to take 0% of that player. I'm willing to live with it. You only get 150 lineups. But for me, it's like I definitely go out of my way to get players that like doesn't look good for me from a like rankings projection standpoint. But yeah, definitely something that I do for best ball. I'm trying to like Yeah, I take a different approach depending on the day for like dailies. Like sometimes I will reach, go for that guy anyway, even though I don't want him to be. I don't like him as much of the field. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Baseball in particular is kind of it's an interesting game because there are times where, like, the best example I can give is there were times last year where, like, there'd be a team that was in Coors Field that had the best top stack odds on at Stochastic, and I
Uh,
get all of their bats like after pick 30. So it's just like you could stack
what?
up 1 through 5 of this team that's in Coors Field that is the top stack, and I was just like, all right, this seems like people are not stacking enough.
Uh,
And I think that maybe it's evolved a little bit since then. Maybe people are getting better at it. But it's a super fascinating game. I haven't played base MLB dailies recently, but I do kind of love the format. I think it's super interesting.
Me too.
Um,
I also liked on Underdog. They did a very smart thing, which is they neutered the pitcher points.
yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
so it's like 2/3 of what you would get in a daily fantasy contest. So it's
Yeah.
not such a dominant factor. I think that was really smart to do.
Why do you say that you think it was smart? I'm trying to
because
decide if I agree with
because
you,
you
but
don't want to make because if you don't do that and you have two ace pitchers,
good point. Yeah.
then so much of your equity is did you get pick one or pick two? And
Yep.
you see this in NBA a lot too, especially in the playoffs. It's like, well, I got pick one, so I get Jokic for 63 points, and the next guy is 50, and then the third guy is
Yep.
43.
Yep.
So it's like if you don't get the first two picks, you're negative EV on your entry. And that's kind of like, I don't know, that's not fun
Less
for
fun.
me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. Yeah, I was trying to decide if I agree with you. I definitely do agree with you. Now that you've laid out the reasoning, because I've definitely had that thought before of like, well, I'm never getting Strider because he just goes 101, in past years, and but yeah, it doesn't matter that much when a strikeout is only worth 1 point. It's like, okay, you obviously you'd like to get him, but not as much, not as big of a deal the way they have neutered pitcher points. Um, Okay, I had a couple follow-up questions, but I want to go back because you said that there were
All
three
right.
projects that you had worked on for DFS, and you kind of named two of them, which was you were trying to automate an exploitative approach, and then you did kind of a late swap project. Are you willing to share the third project that you were working on?
I am, but it is deadly dull. So I'm going to spare you the details.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, you don't want to know. It was marginal improvement, which is great, but it's completely uninteresting.
Okay, so you're not
But
going to give the overview, or
I
not
don't
not
think
even
you
worth
want
it.
to hear it. I'm just going to
Okay,
spare all your listeners the trouble for that one. It's
all
really
right.
it's not that exciting, and it's yeah.
And then my other so you keep talking about your program that you are using for the dailies, and I know Brian's got his draft caddy for best ball. So you clearly have the ability, your new team, the Endgame Syndicate, to put together a product that you can give to the field to use for underdog dailies. Is this something? Is this a tool that's going to be made public for Endgame Syndicate users, or is this just something that you're going to keep for yourself and you're going to use what you learn from it to put out content for your users?
I think any talk of specific tools would be way too speculative. I can't confidently say what I have or what I'm going to have is good enough to be usable for real
Okay.
contests or not. Um, and even if it is, whether it would make sense to sell such a product. So it's definitely possible, but I wouldn't count on that. Definitely going to use my work to create some content. Um, so maybe now would be a good time to talk about the Endgame Syndicate content I'm working on and just see what I did there with that smooth little segue.
Beautiful segue there to talk
I know,
about
thank
the
you.
Endgame Syndicate, which yeah I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. So Daniel just teamed up with Brick 75, Uticow, and internet troll Adam Ship My Money Share. They
Hmm.
started a new company together called Endgame Syndicate. I'm super excited to see what you guys put out there. So first of all, can you just tell me like how from your perspective it came together? I don't think that I think that it sounded like Adam was maybe instrumental in putting it together, and then they asked you, but I don't understand how it all came together. So from your perspective, how did you get involved with the Endgame Syndicate?
Well, I talked to a few different people. Well, some people had contacted me about some business ideas. Some these are all fantasy people I'm talking about now. And some of them were fantasy specific and some weren't. And
Are they
then
in the room with you right now?
no, I had to put in basement and lock up. So no, yeah, some of them. So there were some discussions with some different people, and then um, I guess Brian contacted me first with this idea. I think all of us were interested in doing some things, but we didn't want to create like another Roto Grinders or another Stochastic or anything like that. Like there are a lot of good content sites like that out there, and I think we didn't want that. But I think what we wanted to provide was like partly just access to us, and also just like different things that you wouldn't get um, at a typical content site. So I don't want to promise too much, especially since the other guys are figuring out exactly what they're going to do. I know they all have a lot of ideas about what they want to do, but for me, um, this was a perfect opportunity because I had ideas for some training content that I had written down like a couple years ago. I'm like, I wasn't sure if it was going to be a book or like videos or what. And so I like already had the beginnings of that. And we just recorded some of those videos already, which will be live when Endgame Syndicate goes live. And those are based on the notes I had. So I can just briefly describe for you what this is about.
Yeah.
This series is called Playing with Toys. Get your mind out of the gutter, Neil. I can see what you're thinking about. But specifically, we're talking about toy games here. And a toy game is a small game you use to learn something about, hopefully about larger games. If people listening know about poker and poker books, there's a book called The Math of Poker that has a lot of toy games in it. And it's sort of like, I deal you one card and I get one card, and there's like one round of betting. So it's like a really stupid game. But the point is, you can mathematically analyze it precisely to learn things like how often should you bluff and how often should you call with a bad hand and when should you value bet and can you. But it's just like, there's like 13 hands for each player. It's like one card each, right? So basically what I'm trying to do is use toy games for learning about how to play fantasy. And it's really about building intuition about fantasy concepts. So the thing that is exciting for me about this is the thing I enjoy the most about the work I've done in the last 10 years, which has basically involved trying to write programs that learn how to play games, is using those to actually learn from. So study them. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? What can we learn from it? So that is very much the genesis for this series. So there will be very, very tiny DFS-like games that we'll study and use to talk about things like how does the size of a contest and the payout structure affect your strategy? What does optimal play look like? I'll be doing a lot of that, basically solving these games and giving an optimal solution for a strategy for all of them, and then trying to learn from that and covering things like correlation between lineups, positional scarcity, all these sort of core concepts that we all know as good players are important to think about, but really just like drilling down, get rid of all the noise, like, because DFS is a big, beautifully messy, chaotic game. The idea is to just laser focus on specific things, tweak some knobs, and see what it does. So initially, the first videos will be about toy games that are so small you can solve them on pencil and paper. So you could pause the video and figure it out. But then going on later on, we have planned games that are large enough that you definitely can't do that, but small enough that I'll be able to solve them with computer and show the solution, and we can sort of dive in and figure out why it's doing what it does and what happens when you change things.
So in some ways, it's like so it's more similar to like a theory of DFS. Like you're taking kind of a different angle at like teaching the concepts of DFS as opposed to like here's the best plays tonight. So it's more of a like teaching people to fish kind of thing. Would you say that that is true for the site in general for the Endgame Syndicate? Like, is it more of an educational site than anything else? Like, it seems like you're not going to have a ton of tools right away. You'll have projections, but is it primarily going to be like an educational venture to start?
I think so. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that will be the focus. But we're gonna see where it goes. I mean, I think all of us know that we don't know exactly where it's going yet.
Okay.
But we all have ideas for stuff we definitely want to do. So we'll do those things first and kind of, I guess, see where it leads, and see if people are as excited about it as we are. Hopefully, I
Yeah.
but I what I just outlined for DFS, I also want to do for best ball. So I want to create toy best ball games, and solve those, and really explore things like, how big does a contest have to be before you start passing up, chalky picks? Like, how much can you reach? Are there things like implicit collusion between players where in a draft, like, it's in your interest to basically hand someone else in your draft a juicy pick because it will cause them to play in a way that helps you? These kinds of things, like, should I pass up
Really
this
interesting.
obvious next pick because it's going to get me to some weird construction? For instance, like, how big does the contest have to be before it can start doing that? These kinds of things are really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and you say so. So part of the subscription package will be access to the four of you for now. It sounds like there might be more people involved later on, but for now, access to you and Brick and Adam and Utica. Which yeah, there aren't that many people where I think it's worth it to pay for access to the people. But obviously, a really strong crew of people there. So how I guess DFS is your full time job, so you can be available, and I think that's true of everybody in that group. That you're going to be how available do you think you're going to be? Are you going to do like AMA sessions? Is it just going to be like we'll have this Discord and people can pop in whenever they want? Or I mean, I know it's early. Like, sounds like you haven't really fleshed out all of these details, but do you have any idea like what that
I,
kind of access will look like?
I think we're gonna try and figure out what's best for everyone. I know one thing we definitely want to do is have roundtable discussions with the four of us. Um, I think that will be really interesting. Maybe with member questions too. We'll
What
definitely
would that
have.
look like? Like you would be like a time where you're all on YouTube together, just like all answering
Yeah,
questions, or
maybe talking. I mean, maybe talking about, like, what happened in this. This is just an example of the kind of thing we might do. So, like,
sure.
after week 3 Sunday, we come on and we talk on a Tuesday about the slate, what happened. Maybe we look at either some of our lineups or some random one, competitive players lineups we found, or maybe a subscribers lineups, and sort of look at it through all of our different lenses. I think one of the cool things about this group is we have a lot of different kinds of people. Like, Brian and I are kind of similar in that we're very much, computer data based. Yuta's really different. I mean, we all understand all these things, but it's sort of like the angle is very different. He has um, a very different way of doing things, and then Adam is maybe sort of in the middle. And I think in terms of approach, I don't know if he'd say the same thing, but
I think that's right.
I think that could be really interesting just to see, like, maybe we look at somebody's lineups and, I think they're great and Adam thinks they're crap, and we get into why, for instance.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, Adam used to do that with Awesemo back in the day. They
Ah,
would do NFL show on Mondays. They gave that up over the past couple of years, but they used to do a like review the winning lineup and kind of just a review of the slate in general,
hmm.
which I find super valuable. Like I think the audience I think they found was not necessarily there for it, which is why they didn't do it. But I find it super valuable, and I would imagine the type of people who are going to be attracted to the Endgame Syndicate will find that pretty valuable also. So yeah, it's sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a beginner site. Like we're going to expect like people who watch our stuff, like you've played DFS, you know what a projection is, you know the difference. It's not a prediction, you know correlation, you know leverage, like you know the basics of like how to play. Um, so I think that's going to be very helpful just to narrow our focus.
Yeah,
Um,
how would you define your target audience? Would it be just like the top half of players, the top quarter of players, or what do you think?
that's really interesting. I don't think I have particularly good intuitions about the space as a whole. I mean,
Sure.
my view is so skewed by who I talk to, and
Yeah.
but my hope is it's going to be somebody who like is interested in the game of DFS. Like they're trying to win, and they also find it interesting, and they want to learn more about it. Like I think that's kind of the player I personally have in mind.
Yeah. Which
Because there's a lot of cool stuff to get into.
yeah.
Yeah,
So we'll call it the top half of players, or maybe the people who have the potential to get to the top, the curiosity for DFS, which your level of play maybe is not the same thing as your top ability. That's interesting. Yeah. So you
that's
want the people who
true.
are aiming for the top at the very least, who
Yeah,
want
I
to learn
mean,
from you, who are going to listen to you.
right. People who want to learn. I mean, I want to learn too. I mean, another thing that's really exciting to me about the Playing with Toy series is like I'm excited to learn stuff from these programs, especially when these games get big enough and complicated enough. I think, especially in best ball, where like I feel like I have a lot to learn about sort of game dynamics and all sorts of stuff. I just it's just a really fascinating game, even if it weren't played for money. Like it's just a
For
good
sure.
game. Yeah.
So man, it sounds like you're going to be pretty comprehensive. So you're looking at best ball, you're looking at the daily games, you're looking at rainmakers, you're looking at DFS. Anything else that's going to be involved here?
I don't know. We're gonna have to pace this out carefully. So we're really interested in Pick Six. I can't play it in Colorado,
Oh,
so which
please,
is a bummer.
please do not do pick six stuff. I definitely do
Well, I
not
think
need you guys getting involved.
Pick Six is it's basically it is DFS. Honestly, I mean
Yeah,
it's really the same game in a different
it's
shape.
DFS without being solved, or like without a majority of the field playing it correctly yet. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
I think
I
I think anyone who is already good at DFS is already a big favorite in those games.
yeah.
So I don't feel like it is worth doing because it's a new game, and there are a couple things I think I figured out there. But I don't think it's as interesting as drafting or even Rainmakers. It really is just DFS with much higher rake and hopefully worse
Yeah.
players.
Yeah, much higher rake, but they also have like a bonus that they give out if you don't
Right, if
win
you're
enough on a
thinking,
given day, which is extremely valuable in my opinion.
yeah,
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 it's been a pretty profitable game for me. As DFS has been less profitable, I've been able to make up for it. Just playing pick six is like for right
I,
now, it's kind of a cash cow. So I'm nervous about as the field gets better. It's obviously going to go away. Like there's nothing we can do to stop. It's going to
no.
happen. The field is going to get good. It's going to be harder to make money at it, and we'll have to adjust. But yeah,
Well, I
no,
think
don't love hearing that you guys get involved.
I think the profitability of all of these games, in my opinion, and some others, is dominated by the number of. It's not about how many good or great players there are, or how good or great they are. It's how many terrible players there are, and
Yeah, it's
it's
interesting that that Shady Advice has talked about recently a few times.
okay.
But
Yeah,
I had never really thought of it that way. But yeah, that's really interesting.
if you do the math, and I've actually done the exercise of I'll just describe something I've done. I chatted with some people on Discords and Twitter about this. So um, people are always talking about, the edge is shrinking, which is inevitable. And how much is it shrinking? So I did an exercise of, which I posted about, basically comparing my current best process, running it on all the contests from 2022, and then all the contests in 2023, using my own post-lock sims. And the dollar amount that I expected to win went down by about 10%. Okay. Which is probably pretty close to what I would have guessed. But then, so that's all fair and good and interesting. But then I was like, what's dominating the profitability of these contests? So as I'm sure you've seen all these conversations about, when I do this post-lock sim in MLB, there's hardly any winners at the top.
Right.
And I looked at those and I got very different numbers and different winners, some the same, some different. And I tended to get a much flatter result. That is, the best winners were winning less, but there were more of them compared to a lot of the other sims that I saw. And this is not a huge sample size, but it was significant difference, and can chalk that up to obviously using different projection sets, different correlation estimators, also just the number of trials you run. Like if you run a post-lock sim and there are 20,000 entrants, and a quarter of the prize pool goes to first, and you run 100,000 sims, that's not nearly enough, because an average lineup should win about 5 times, but because of randomness, it might not win any. So it'll look like a terrible lineup, and actually it might be a good one. So you need to run a crap ton of trials just to get good data. So I just put that out there. But even accounting for all of that, I'm like, okay, there's all these differences. I'm like, well, what's the number that really matters? So I took a couple contests and I simmed out the EV of every lineup using a million simulated contests. Okay, a reasonable number. You should really do more. And I asked the question: how many lineups are losing more than the rake? Okay, and how much money is available to be won? So let me just describe what I'm talking about here. So in order for a lineup to be plus EV, you need to overcome the rake, which means somebody else needs to have lost more than the rake to pay for your rake and money left over, right? So if you have just to get intuition about just how bad this is, if half the people are losing double the rake, then the other half of the people are breaking even on average, right?
Yeah.
That's just the math of it, right? So I was like, how much money is there available to be won in these contests? So basically taking all the money that's left over from the worst lineups that are losing more than the rake. So they paid their rake and they donated this money. Now you take that money and use it to pay everyone else's rake. Whatever's left is what could be won in a sort of broad average sense, right? And when I compared that number, so I ran that analysis and compared it with somebody else using different projections and different sims, and I think we did this for a few contests, those numbers were very close to each other. And this makes sense because it's much easier to tell a terrible lineup compared to a break-even lineup than the difference between a great lineup and a good lineup. And there are much more of them. So there's probably some averaging that happens, but we came out to some very, very similar numbers. And that's sort of the number that I am interested in tracking over time. Like, how much money is there left to be won after the worst lineups have paid for everyone else's rate, or if they even have, right?
So for those of us who do not look at this stuff as closely as you, what would you say are the telltale signs of a terrible lineup? You say it's much easier to tell a terrible lineup. In my mind, it would be like doesn't project well enough, or is going to be too chalky, or if we're
That's it.
talking duplicate sports? Okay, so it's which is more common, I guess, is a better
I
question.
haven't I haven't looked at that.
Okay,
That's a really good question. It probably varies a ton by sport, but yeah, I mean that's it. You're either just wildly underprojected, or you're just competing with 100 with 10 with 5,000 other versions of the same lineup.
okay,
Like it doesn't have to be literally duped.
right,
I mean, it just needs to be highly correlated, right? So you're
right,
just highly correlated with a bunch of other lineups, so you just crushed, right?
okay,
Like, so I mean that I don't see what else there could be besides those two things. I don't know what the
yeah,
mix is, and I did this analysis for like the DraftKings flagship contest, so like the $15, $18, you know, 50 grand, 100 grand of first MLB. That's what I was looking at. So
okay. Have you looked at it for like? I know you do a lot of analysis of like dupe sports, so like NFL Showdown, which I know you have had a good amount of success in. In that, is it more like just like this lineup is duped more than it should be for its possibility of winning? Is that typically what it makes a bad lineup in NFL Showdown, or
well,
is it
that's
or the other?
that's literally the definition of what the EV is, right? It's
Sure.
like, yeah. So yes, yeah. The worst NFL Showdown lineups are horrifically bad because they're so duped that you just can't ever make up for the dupe level, right?
Have you, and I think you may have actually, we had this conversation on Twitter at one point, but off the top of your head, can you think of any lineups? Like, what is the most you've seen a lineup duped that was still plus EV in your stuff?
It was actually FanDuel. So I don't do many FanDuel analyses because they don't give you the CSVs, right? But I think it was either literally a Super Bowl showdown. I think it might have been Super Bowl. And I tied first and got like $10,000 or something. I don't remember the dollar amount.
Was it a Millie Maker, or do you know what the top round
Yeah,
is
it was
supposed
a
to be?
Millie Maker. It was
Okay.
massively, massively duped lineup. And it was not duped enough, according to my stuff.
Yeah.
And it sounds funny, but if you have a contest, imagine this is like a showdown contest with hundreds of thousands of entries. Like being duped 200 times might not be that terrible,
Right.
right? Like imagine an infinite contest, right?
Yeah. Well,
It's
it's
just
you
like,
know, I'm trying to remember what Blender calls it, the like using extreme concepts to explain. It's like if you knew that this lineup has a 100% chance of winning, well, clearly you're going to want to play that lineup. If you know, if anything, if you're beating the rake by playing that lineup, then it's worth playing that lineup. And that's kind of which obviously you're never going to get that a lineup with a 100% chance of winning, but using the like extreme concepts, like yeah, it certainly makes sense that there's going to be lineups where it's like it's going to be duplicated a ton, but you're still making money with that lineup. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
and
Um,
the reverse happens too. I mean, there's a few like DFS theorems you're gonna discover in my Playing with Toys series, but one of them is that um, if the number of players in your contest is n, let's say call it 100, and your lineup's chance of winning is less than 1 over n, it was less than 1 in 100 to win, it's probably not a playable lineup, right?
right,
Because even in the best case, and you're the only one who has it, you're not getting your fair share of the prize pool when you win because you don't win often enough.
right,
So, like, the reverse is also true in an infinitely large contest, and some of the showdowns are close enough you can treat it like this. You can just play a lineup. You can play any lineup that wins with any frequency, and you play it in proportion to its chance of winning. So if a lineup has a 5% chance of winning, you should play it 5% of the time. And if it has a 1% chance of winning, you should play 1% of the time. And if you do that, then and you let everybody else make ownership mistakes, that would be a balanced approach. So
this is your approach, your balanced approach. Yeah,
well, that would be one, yeah. So that's sort of like a infinite winner take all theorem, is that the balance approach there is you just play each lineup in proportion to how likely it is to win. That's it.
I feel like it has caught on a little bit more. Like I feel like Shady Advice talks a lot about like portfolio management in his
Mm.
lineups, and it sounds to me more like he's sort of talking about your sort of balance. I think he still maybe has an exploitative style, but I'm trying to think of like, would you call it like a portfolio approach? Like you're trying to come up with a portfolio of lineups that is going to um, I'm trying to figure out how I'm trying to say this. It sounds like
So
it seems to me that like Brick 75 has been talking a lot more about like his portfolio approach recently. Shady Advice talking about his portfolio approach. Would you describe it as a like you're trying to put out a portfolio of lineups? Like it's not. It doesn't come down to your individual lineups because you're not playing every lineup in your set. Is it more of a like you're trying to have a balanced portfolio?
so
Um,
you put I think you put your finger on something that's really tricky and we're thinking about.
yeah.
So I think the concept of balance is is somewhat orthogonal to the concept of portfolio management. So it's confusing because they're kind of related to each other a little bit. So if you take so in years past, I've taken a sort of pure balance approach to baseball. I'm not saying that's what I do now. I'm not saying that's not what I do now,
Okay.
but depends. Um, but if you do this, you'll find, and I like to talk about baseball because it's easy to talk about stacks.
Yep.
So you just say, well, I compute that I should stack Dodgers 13% today and Yankees 8% and Pirates 4%. And I just basically do a random distribution of that. That's what I would have done. I mean, that kind of by default does give you a diverse portfolio of lineups,
Right.
but portfolio management is not the same thing. It's, and I don't have enough math to really figure out where and how they differ. Um, I just know that usually in most of my approaches, I tend to get a lot of diversity for free
Okay.
just because I tend to get a lot of different things. And where it really gets tricky is in a small contest where you have a small number of lineups. So like 100 man and you've got 3 entries. Now you really have to think because if I'm just doing 150 lineups, I'm going to get a mix of stuff. Some of it's going to be a little bit too similar, but it's big enough that it's probably going to be close to diverse enough. But if you have 3 lineups, like it turns out to be a little bit tricky to balance the strategic considerations and the portfolio considerations. Like it's a non-trivial thing to do. I have some approaches. Shady probably has a better solution than I do. I don't know what he does. I know Brick's thought about it, but it's tricky in those situations where like you could imagine a situation where you're like, oh well, portfolio theory. I want these 3 lineups to be completely different. They're going to be, let's just pretend they're all 5-3 stacks. They're all going to be completely different 5-3s with no overlap, completely different pitchers. Well, what if the efficient ownership of one of the pitchers is 80%?
Right.
Well, now what do you do? Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. Is my long rambling answer to that
So in a
question?
150 set with your balanced approach, do you ever like get 40% of one team stacks, or is does your approach tend to
In a
lead you to
150
more?
set? No, not
Okay,
in a normal.
even
Not in.
like Braves in Colorado, or I don't know if I guess that would not be the example because a lot of people would play it, but maybe.
I don't think I've ever
Um,
gotten anything that high for
okay,
stacks. I certainly in smaller contests, I think that's probably closer to correct. But like in the flagship, I'd have to look. I don't remember ever seeing a number that big. Um,
okay.
maybe 20s. I don't know. I'd have to look at that, but I
I'm
don't think so.
I'm thinking back to like the top. I feel like I've seen in the top stacks tool, the stochastics tool, it was like 30% is maybe the highest I've seen, which is like 30% chance to be in the top stack like Braves and Coors. But that also there's a different metric for the value stack, so maybe that plays into it as well. Like top stack odds
Sure.
versus value, I guess maybe plays has some impact there. Um, I want to get back to talking a little bit more about Endgame Syndicate. First of all, Tyler, thank you for reminding me, Tyler. Yes, please do like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or if you're listening in podcast form, rate and review. Really appreciate any support that you give. So getting back to Endgame, so first of all, OA asks, what is the ETA for the Endgame Syndicate launching beyond what looks like a very, very basic website that you have right now?
I don't have a date yet, but I'm gonna say weeks.
You started working already. Like you've already made a few videos, it sounds like.
Yeah, I got 3 down. I know what I want to do next. I know the other guys have stuff they want to do, so maybe they've done it. Yeah, it's gonna be weeks.
I'll ask this question. OA asks, do you run your process local or on the cloud?
I run on the cloud, but I'm cheap, so when I do my post game analysis, I run it on my 10-year-old, quad core machine because I don't care if it takes 3 hours.
Nice.
But yeah, I always want to make sure my process can be done in the cloud at all times, so that if I have an issue with my hardware, like I know I'm gonna be okay.
So you say that we have made a few videos already. Is that you make it? Like, do you have a producer? I guess I'll ask that to start. Do you have a producer for your videos?
Not yet. Well, I did my first videos with Brick, so
Okay.
I thought that was a good move. As you may have noticed, I have a tendency to ramble, so I figured just having me be with somebody else would prevent me from getting like wildly ahead of myself. Like just assuming something was
a lot of us are
understood.
fascinated when you ramble, though, so it doesn't feel like rambling because it's often like really interesting concepts that are a little bit beyond most of us.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think any of them are. So
Well, you simplify things well for us, I would say. So you do a
well,
good job
I don't.
of explaining
I
tough
don't think I
concepts.
have such a great mastery of any of these concepts per se. I think it's more that I know what the problems are, and I'm stubborn enough to just grind away and code away until I figure it out. I don't think any of the things I've discovered in terms of game concepts are really that hard to understand. The engineering is hard. Like, yes, the software I do, that is not trivial. For sure, it's taken me a lot of time, but not impossible. But in terms of the game of DFS itself and related games, I think like I feel like anybody reasonably interested can get it from a strategic standpoint. Yeah.
Do you have an idea of like? So are you trying to get this series completed before you launch the site, like or launch
Oh,
the?
we're gonna start with some stuff locked and loaded for sure. So when we launch, we will have content ready to go, and then we're
Okay.
gonna come up with like some kind of schedule. Like for my series, we might do something every week or every other week. We might intersperse with videos where we take questions because some of the concepts, especially around playing more like thinking about equilibrium strategies, is a little bit alien to people. It takes a little getting used to. So we'll definitely, like, why would you look at an equilibrium strategy? Like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I want to win the most money, and why are you, going down this rabbit hole? So there'll probably be a fair bit of that, which we're happy to do. And then just see. I guess it's really just a question of seeing what works for people,
Okay.
both us and subscribers. Like what's getting it done for them. Right? So
I think I did not put the link in the description of this video. I'll have to add it later. But OAS, what's the website? It's just endgamesyndicate.com. There's nothing really there at this point. I hope that this is not the website in its final form currently. So you can go there and sign up for the newsletter to let you know when the site actually launches. But yeah, it's at endgamesyndicate.com. Go sign up for the newsletter there. Is it going to be mostly video content? Do you imagine you'll be doing a lot of written content?
I don't know. Writing is hard. I'm not sure that I'm really a great writer. Maybe I do have some stuff written, which was the basis of the first 3 videos. it's humbling trying to write stuff. I could use some practice, I guess.
It was interesting to me. So Brick, when he was kind of laying out what the site is going to be on the Lowe's episode where he kind of announced it, described you as being described himself as being the like programmer and you as being the game theory guy, which I know that you're really good with game theory, but I've also always thought of you as being like a really like top level programmer. Are you going to be doing any kind of programming for the site? I mean, you comp sci major, as I recall, comp sci and music are your majors. Are you going to
Yeah,
be doing any programming for a site, or are you just going to be doing like game theory stuff?
unknown. I will
Okay,
definitely be doing it in the sense that I will have to write programs to power the content I'm doing. Like, so,
sure.
yeah. So um, beyond that, I don't know yet. We'll see.
Okay. Um, so one, this is not really related to the Endgame Syndicate. Just going back to looking through my questions, one thing that I noticed. So you talked about the concept of supervised learning in the last time we did a video together, which is machines learning what others in the field are doing, and that's not something that was part of your process at the time. Is that something that you have? Has that become part of your process? Has the machine learning led to giving you a field of lineups that the field is playing?
So it's just for terminology's sake. So machine learning is a pretty general term.
Yeah, I don't understand what it means. I just know it's way over my head.
I think so. There are different kinds of machine learning. Supervised learning, it describes basically training a computer using a huge existing data set.
Sure. Okay.
So Chat GPT, supervised learning, it basically digested the internet. Image classification is a classic example. So um, the reason your iPhone can find pictures of your cats if you type cat is because it's been trained on a huge set of images, and it's there. All the images are labeled, so it's fed like, here's a bunch of cats, here's a bunch of dogs, and then it figures out what to do. That's supervised learning. Um, and unsupervised learning is more of the stuff that I've done, which is basically figure out a good strategy from scratch. So we
Right.
have no idea how people play. So play yourself, learn, get better, iterate, all sorts of there are many different algorithms and approaches. And supervised learning would be something you could do to like try and figure out what the field is doing. And I imagine, I don't know, I'm guessing that many content sites probably use supervised learning for ownership projections. So they're saying, well, here's this huge list of slates we have and what the ownerships were. Here's this new slate with these new salaries. And it'll be like, well, the program will like, this kind of looks like this and a little bit like that. And looking at the past, I can I can try and guess what people are going to do, right? That would be,
Yeah.
there's got to be, I'm sure some people in the industry are doing something like that.
Yeah.
Seems just like such an
So it
obvious
seems obvious.
approach. Yeah,
I feel like
not
I've gotten the
easy.
impression from people who actually do this stuff that it isn't that they are not quite that advanced. But I
Uh,
might be totally wrong about that. Maybe the sites are doing that. I have no like I worked at Stochastic and I have no idea how they did ownership projections. But I guess in conversation I've had, I get the impression that it's based on like we just run our projections with some randomness and like see what comes out of an
uh,
optimizer by doing that. So it seems like it's more rudimentary than that. But that seems like it would be better to have that kind of learning from what the field has done in the past would definitely be ideal. So
it's hard.
probably what's
It's
happening.
genuinely hard. I mean, again, it sounds great in practice. I've never tried that, and it's probably really gnarly when you get into the details of how to actually execute that well. Um, so maybe people have tried like, fuck it, I'll just do the simple thing and it's better.
Right.
I honestly don't know, but it just when you said that, that's the first thing that came to my mind. I've thought of that before. I'm like, oh yeah, just
It would make
train.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are things about that would be hard, like the structure of salaries and how they interact with projections could make it very difficult to learn to generalize. So you imagine something needs to generalize over patterns. Like it needs to learn things like, well, when there's a chalky, when there's a highly projected cheap player, he's highly owned, and just that's gonna. But what if there are like a large number of similarly projected players also
Right.
available? Like there's all of these.
So many
Like
factors.
you might need a lot of data, and it's possible thinking about it now that maybe there isn't enough data to really do this that well. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Interesting project if somebody's listening. Let me know how
Right.
it goes.
Because every slate is so unique, so we don't have that many
Yeah,
like this. Oh, this slate looks exactly like that slate. It's like, um,
that's
looking
one of
at
the best things about the game of DFS. It's like just like poker. It's not a game. It's a category of game, right?
yeah. It reminds me of
So
like Weather Edge. I know you're a Roto Grinders guy. You
yeah,
look at Kevin Ross Weather Edge. It's like, I mean, it's certainly better than nothing. But I'm always like, okay, you have a 3 game sample for like games that were in
yeah.
this environment. It's one of those like there's just so many different, I don't know, things that are at play.
It's
So it's
gnarly. I
plenty
mean,
hard.
I think I've talked publicly about how like I try to when the occasion comes up to model weather risk for baseball games. Like
Hmm.
if it's a game, it's like, well, there's a chance this just goes 2 innings and is postponed. Like, I mean, I have something in my process for that, but I still have to enter some guess about what the probability is that it's going to go south. And
Right.
I don't think even using expert advice, I don't think I'm that great at that. I need it to be better than doing nothing. Like that's my standard. Like, is this an improvement on just
Letting it
Xing
ride.
it out or ignoring it? Then I'm like, okay, I guess it's worth doing, even though I don't know, is it a 20% risk, a 38% risk? I don't know.
I'm glad to hear you and like I know shady advice. I was when I had the conversation with him about weather in baseball games, and he was just like, yeah, sometimes I just X out a game if it seems like it might go. I'm like, okay, it's good to know that people who have much more advanced processes than myself are still like, I don't really know what to do with this weather situation. It's just because it's kind of unsolvable. Like what really can you do? We can't predict the weather any better than a weatherman, obviously. So yeah, it's one of
There,
those things
I
that
mean,
it's tough for all of us, I guess.
there are a lot of things like that where, in principle, there's a solution, but you're just never going to get it, and you have to do something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I hate those spots because I hate doing arbitrary things. But
I
like
get the
another
impression
thing,
that you want everything to be 100% automated. Like you just want to tell your computer program what to do, and it's just going to make all those decisions for you. Is that kind of
yeah,
accurate? You
and
want things
it's because I don't want to introduce my own biases, and I
right.
don't and I want it to be replicable and testable. Like, but sometimes you just have to do these things. Like, I think NBA is a really good example. If you have and I'm not an expert. You
Questionable tag.
probably yeah. So you've got a short slate, 3 games, and the late game has a potential for a lot of movement. Like, it seems obvious that all things being equal, you should leave put more of your players in from the last game and more of your lineups so that you can change things around. But how much should you do that? Like, what's the best way to do that? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
And it
I
probably
just
depends
know it's a
somewhat on how
thing.
much the field is doing that. Like if the
Correct.
field is all leaving space for
Yeah.
the late games, like
If
yeah,
they're overdoing it, you should jam the first 2 games, right?
right.
And hope that they just, get screwed somehow in the
Yeah.
last game. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean,
I
these things
always struggle with
obviously matter.
the concept in NBA that like you often hear people talking about like, well, this player is questionable, so like make sure you leave a 2v2 swap or something. And I sometimes galaxy brain my way to like, well, maybe if I don't do that, I'll be different than the field. If I just assume that player is going to be out and I'm going to play this $3,000 player, everybody else is going to have a 2v2 there, and I'm just going to have that one. I don't know. It's one of those
Yeah,
things that you
I've had the same thought. I'm like, Luca is questionable in the last game, and I'll have some lineups where he's the only player I have in the game,
right.
which is scary
Yeah.
because if he's out, you're screwed. But like, how
What
many
if he's the only
people?
player you want from that game? And yeah, nobody
Right,
else has
and
it.
yeah, exactly. I have no idea how to quantify or measure. I just know that those things matter,
That's
right?
reassuring to me that you don't know how to quantify it either, because yeah, it's
I
a
mean, I also
tough
haven't given
problem.
it a ton of thought,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's just an example. It's just there's a limit to how not precise, to how many factors you can
Yeah,
automate. Yeah, it's just a
we
limit.
can't. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just an unpredictable game that we're playing. Um, all right, so I want to get back to so we've talked many times about how much back testing you do, and I it sounded a couple years ago like you were like every morning waking up and running a sim of the actual lineups in the contest versus your candidate lineups, like choosing a different 150 set than what you actually played to see like
Yep.
what is your range of outcomes for like what you could have done, because you, as I recall, like you basically have a group of candidate lineups and you just choose them at random, like choose a random 150 for your set generally. um
It's a very important question, but even
yeah.
more important is I have to fetch my second beer. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
I will be right back.
You go get your beer and I will do an ad read here.
Right.
This ad read is for this channel. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Good morning, Bindles. Yes. Don't know where you are that it's morning. Yeah, I don't have an ad read prepared here, but yeah, please like and subscribe to the channel. Oh, I have I can throw a banner up here. I think my subscribers have gone up very slightly since the last time I
Nice.
ran this, but I do have a subscriber goal of 2,000. I am falling very short of it, so I would appreciate anybody subscribing to the channel. All right, Daniel is back, so I will stop. I forget what the word is that people use for buying time. There's not filibustering, but there's like a word that people use on streams, and I forget what it
Oh,
is.
I don't
Okay.
know how.
All right, but
Vamping?
Daniel's back, so I can stop doing that. Um, yeah. Is this the same beer? Owe wants to know
It
what's on
is.
tap.
This
You.
is a winter lager. They're just getting through the last of it. It's quite tasty.
All right. So you run your sims. So do you still do that like every day? Like back test what could have happened with my lineups?
You bet.
Is it correct that it's basically like you have a group of lineups, and I have no idea what this is. It 10,000 lineups, 1,000 lineups, whatever, but it's just randomly selecting 150 from your set?
Yeah. So again, it depends on how balanced I'm being, but let's just talk about
Vamping. Yes. Thank you,
vamping.
Birdoggy.
Yeah, there we go.
You
Yeah.
talk, and my foot is cramping up, so I'm going to stand up real quick. Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah. No. So yeah. So if you're playing, I always give the example of baseball again because it's so easy. So let's say you decide you want 10% of your lineups to be 5-3 stacks of the Yankees and the Marlins. Okay. Well, which 10% is it? So that's 15 lineups. And there are probably a million different combinations. Well, maybe not literally a million, but there are probably tens of thousands of combos of that with different pitchers and hitters that are all roughly the same as each other. So I don't generate them all, but I generate a lot of them, and I
Hmm.
essentially will randomize across those. And then, like you said, after the fact, I won't just look at my actual result. I'll say, well, what was my EV of all of the lineups? What was the average EV of all the lineups in that set? Um, it's a little annoying because you have to account for the fact of removal also. So you can't do the EV of each lineup individually. You have to consider the entire clump of all your lineups because they compete with each other. So to get the numbers right is kind of annoying, but I'll do that like 100,000 times. So I'll look at 100,000 150 sets and take the average EV. And the point of this exercise is just to reduce the variance of my results statistically, because I'm just removing the variance of which New York um, Marlin stack did I pick. Like that's not interesting from a backtesting perspective. The question is, how did my pool perform overall, assuming that I was gonna, randomize appropriately across it. So it removes a lot of the variance from my results. It doesn't remove all of it. There's still a lot, but it removes a big chunk, like maybe 3/4.
And you kind of already said earlier in the show that you, in doing this, learned that your expected ROI has dropped about 10%
Yeah.
over the course of the past couple of years. So that would be,
Well,
I hate,
keeping the process the same. So the caveat is,
right.
if I use my current process from 2022 to 2023, the EV was down about 10%. Not just 10
Okay.
percentage points, but 10% dollars down.
Right.
But my process isn't the same. From 2022 to 2023, I improved it by about the same amount. So it's kind of a wash.
Okay.
However, at some point, and for me, I think this point is past, the field is getting better faster than my process is.
So that
So
was
I,
going to be that was obviously where this conversation is going is
yeah,
how long do we have left? Like is DFS like if the field is getting better quicker than your process is, and that could be just like this has been a unique period in that several sites have dropped very advanced sims in the recent. So maybe it's not going to continue to evolve at the same pace it is. But do you have any kind of feel for it? Do you have any like opinion on how close we are to like nobody's going to be profitable at if the rate stays the same?
I don't. I'd just be guessing. The only strong opinion I have, I'm not completely married to it, is again just this idea that the thing to be looking at is the number of terrible lineups, and that dominates everything. So that number can go down because people get better and use better tools, or it can go down because they stop playing and are not replaced. Um, I'm guessing it's more of the latter, but I'm less confident. I think it's more about people leaving than people getting better, but I don't
Interesting.
know. That's a guess. I'm not. I don't feel strongly about that one, but I definitely feel strongly it is the number of for almost all of the volume that anyone listening to this plays, which is dominated by contests that are like, less than $100 to enter, right?
Right.
Probably a lot less than that. Like that numbers dominates the whole thing. I do feel pretty strongly about that. So again, whether they're leaving because they're doing sports betting or they're just done, or whether they're quote leaving the pool of bad players by being not bad players anymore, like the effect is the same, right?
So just looking at the number of like terrible lineups in the contest, that is going down, and that's
Yeah,
the issue. It's not that like, oh, suddenly everybody's making great lineups with the Sims. It's just like, I mean, it could be, as you say, it could be people who were making terrible lineups are just using Sims now, which are spitting out good lineups for them, so they're leaving the pool of like making bad lineups players.
and the
Interesting.
thing to emphasize for people who just haven't given this much thought, like any lineup that's losing less than the rake is costing you money. So you're like, haha, that lineup is, minus 8%. I'm like, guess what? That's an above average lineup. And it's taking money out of the price pool, because if the 15% rake, right? He paid the 15% rake and then he clawed 7% back, more than he should have from the prize pool. That comes out of all of everyone else's pocket, right? So it's not enough to have losers in your contest. They need to lose more than the rake.
You need some bad losers in your contests.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, So one other thing that I remember from that conversation about you running your Sims backtesting thing is it was one of the more jarring things that I've ever heard in an interview. Is I think it was in
Uh-oh.
your episode of Theory of DFS with Blender, where you said
Okay.
you had had a very profitable year, but based on your Sims, you could have, in your worst case scenario, lost like $700,000 in a year where you won maybe 400,000, something like that. And I was like, holy shit! Like if you could lose $700,000 with your very advanced process, like guys like me could lose a lot. Obviously, we're not playing the same volume, so I guess we couldn't. But like that is pretty jarring hearing that even somebody at your level could theoretically lose $700,000 in a year. So now you've been playing DFS for a few years. I guess my first question is: have you had any prolonged downswings at all?
So I'll get to that, but to
Okay.
address your first thing first,
Yeah.
I have spent a lot of time thinking through and simming out worst case scenarios and also just scenarios in general. And I have gotten better over time about thinking about that. So while it's true I could have, quote, lost this huge sum, in practice that never would have happened. And the reason for that is um, I'm not following a fixed betting strategy. When I'm doing better, I'm more aggressive. When I'm doing poorly, I scale back my play. So all of those kinds of analyses, you have to factor that in as well. So I have had stretches that have been, I guess the worst stretch, I'd have to look. I usually don't look too closely, and I think that's probably a good thing. I kind of segregate things by sport, and I say, what do my sims say? And how am I doing in my own sims? How am I doing with the bias reduction techniques I talked about? And then how am I doing in real dollars? And when those are both going well, I'm betting more. When it's sort of split, I'm backing off. And when they're both looking bad, I back way off, right? So
Right.
if I have a sport where my actual and sim results are poor, like I'm taking the foot off the gas. So that's part of it. But I guess the biggest stretch I had might have been about $250,000 down.
That's
But the
not
thing
bad for
is,
somebody at your volume. That's not bad at all.
that would never have happened had I not gone up a lot before.
Right.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So like take this year's baseball for example. I'm doing fine, not amazing, not bad. It's about par, I would say, where I'd like to be, which is great. I'd take par in DFS if I could just take the average result month in and month out. I would take it. Of course, I did it in an extremely volatile way, but
well, par for you is making money. To be clear, you're not
it's
breaking
true.
even. That's not.
But
Yeah.
and I'm not going to say how much it is,
Yeah.
but it's usually less than people think in percentage terms. Usually people think it's higher than it is, but no complaints. But what I was going to say is, imagine if I was down 5% and my sims also said I should have just been right around break even. I would be backing way, way off because
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe baseball is solved, or maybe not solved, but there just isn't enough dead money anymore. I don't know. And I would back way, 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 way off if that happened. So, so that's one way in which these kinds of, like, what's the worst streak you've been on? And it's a good question. I don't mean it's a bad question. It's a little misleading because if you're adjusting your play,
It's a
based
fun
on,
question for the audience.
it's a fun question, yes. But yeah, the answer is a lot if you measure from like a high point to a low point.
Yeah. I definitely understand that. Yeah, it's always interesting here because I feel like I've heard many good players say, like, even if you're really good, if you're playing really well, you can still have a losing year. Which I hear that and I'm like, oh, thank God, because I've had losing years. So I'm like, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm playing poorly. That's really reassuring. And then I think the person that I think of the most with like I can't like based on this conversation doesn't sound like he's ever had to lose in year is like Steve Buzzard. Just like in talking casually with him, I don't get the impression that he's ever had a losing year. And I think that you remind me kind of him of him in that you are both like very, very much back testing constantly, like totally redoing your process all the time. I assume you and Steve, you live near each other. Do you guys know each other? I think the two of you and
We've
Shrek
met
are
at
going to miss
live.
up.
We've met at live
just at live
finals a couple times. There are quite a few Colorado fantasy players.
I know Shrek is. I thought at one point you
Shrek
and
is up
Steve
here.
and Shrek were supposed to meet up.
Yeah, it
but
just
I
never
maybe I
happened
misremembered.
because somebody
Okay.
had a thing. It'll happen. But yeah, I mean, just full disclosure, I was break even on FanDuel last year. Like,
Okay.
to be fair, it's a much smaller volume than DK. But
Purple Octopus on FanDuel for those who don't know.
yes, yeah. But FanDuel is usually almost all my volume on FanDuel is baseball.
What do you think is your best sport?
So it depends on what you mean by best. If you mean,
Expected profit, I guess, or yeah, I guess this is a tough question because
it
there's
is a
also
tough
like different
question.
number of slates. What
Yeah,
is your favorite DFS sport? Like, which sport do you like go in thinking I'm gonna be? This is a tough question. I'm trying to think of all the different ways you can think of it because like football is like, well, you can win the most money if you win, but there's so few slates. Baseball, it's like
yeah.
if you're good at it, you can more
Baseball is the
reliably.
one for me. Yeah, baseball is the sport I'm like, yay, baseball
Okay,
season because
yeah,
I can just grind it out. There's so many slates. Um, it's like a dual comfort. Like if I'm still winning, I'm pretty confident I'll have a winning year. Um, and if I'm not anymore, I'm also confident I'll find out. You know what I mean?
because
Like
you have so many days to
there's so
backtest.
many. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like football. I still don't know what the hell my EV is. I assume it's pretty good for showdown at least, but I have no solid estimator. Like so few slates, the field's changed enormously over time. Like at least with baseball, there's so much data that it's comforting to know there are so many slates. And yeah, it definitely baseball.
it was comforting to me until I had a losing year a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm not as good at baseball DFS as I thought I was, and that was rough.
Awesome,
Just
sucker.
it can be a mental grind when you're just losing every day at baseball, and it's just like I don't understand what's happening. Why am I losing again? Like, yeah, there was it can be tough when you're especially when you're maxing it out and losing every day. But it feels like you going into the baseball season. I always feel the most hopeful. Like, okay, I've got a lot of games here we can win over time. Um, so Endgame Syndicate. Getting back to that. So what
Yes.
is in it for you? Why are you getting into the Endgame Syndicate while you are still very successful at DFS yourself on a personal level? You obviously you don't need the income from another venture. So what drew you into the Endgame Syndicate?
So a few things. Income is nice. We'll see what it is. Who knows? Small business is hard, as you all know. I've been involved in quite a few. Some
Yeah.
wildly successful, others wildly not successful. So, but that's always fun. I think the bigger motivation for me is I have a lot of cool stuff that I want to do that I haven't seen done, and like honestly, being in a group of really good people will be motivating for me to actually fucking do it instead
Yeah.
of like sort of half-assing it. So that's a big one for me, and I I don't think it's the kind of thing. There is all this chatter. It's such a bizarre world to like, after it was announced, and like I'm on one of many discords, and there's this like long thread of people like um, hypothesizing on what my motivations are, like for pages and pages.
Am I
And
in this
it's
Discord with you, or is this a different
no,
Discord?
no, 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 no,
Okay.
no, no. This is a different one. And it's like, what is going? This is such a bizarre thing to read. And really, it's just it's interesting stuff that hasn't been done, and I want to do it. Um, I think that's most of it, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, if we make a lot of money at it, that's awesome. Would love that. But just it's something I want to do. I don't think it's the kind of thing that's going to turn people into crushers or anything like that. I think it's really, for me, the focus is really just on honing intuition and learning how these games work at their like base level. Um,
So it's like an intellectual curiosity more than
but
anything.
it will help. I think it will help people, but it's
Yeah.
not like it's not going to teach you how to beat these games. Like it's like okay now, like just like buying a poker book is not going to turn you into a crusher. But there are many really good poker books. I sort of think of it that way.
Kind of like a first step to like this is going to get you thinking on the right track, like thinking in the right direction, and then from there you kind of have to figure it out.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, that's one of the scenarios. Um, but we'll see.
So we are an hour and 45 minutes in, so I just want to say, if you have questions for Nerdy Tenor, get those questions in chat. There have been several. I've not been keeping up with chat very well, so I'm going to go back and read some things from chat. But if you guys
Oh,
have
sure.
questions for Nerdy, first of all, Trey, he says Nerdy's stupid moments is my top range of genius moments. That's true for like 99% of us, I think.
I doubt that,
Uh, yeah. Just scrolling down. Actually, while I am scrolling, I do want to ask you the question. DFS Mount Rushmore. Who was on your DFS Mount Rushmore?
so I'm not a good person to ask for this because I kind of started taking DFS seriously kind of late. So, um, like I started just doing NFL Showdown in 2019 with my business partner, and then we broke even. And then 2020 is when we won, and I started use that from bankroll. So I'm a little late.
Yeah.
Um,
That's okay. It's it's very personal. Like some people feel obligated to say like, well, Condia has to be there, but you can just say like from the past 3 years if you want.
I think Osimo has to be on there, not just because of his play, which anyone can look up, which is super impressive, but like impact on the industry as a whole. Plus, I really like Alex. At times, I spent time with him.
Yeah.
So he's definitely there. Um, after that, I don't. It's so hard. I'm gonna like. See, I'm so conflict averse. I'm like, who am I gonna offend the most by leaving them off the list? Um,
Notice you haven't named any of your business partners.
well, that would
It's
be
kind of awkward.
a little too on the nose. I mean,
Yeah.
but you know, gosh, is it too self-serving to put Yuta on there? I guess we kind of have to. I mean,
I mean, he
on
obviously
results,
fits. Yeah.
I mean, on results alone, and it's much more than that. He's I think he has to be there. And then after that, um, gosh, it's really tough. I don't know. To be determined. TBD.
Okay.
That's 3 letters though, and there's only 2 left. I guess we can throw Kandia on there in principle. I've read about Kandia. I never played
Okay.
with Kandia. Um,
He was a
and then,
crusher. I can tell you from experience. He was something else. It was like, who is this Condia guy?
right, Crusher, and also I guess somewhat of a cautionary tale too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then, gosh, I don't know. I'll think
I'm
about it.
enjoying how difficult this is for you, to be honest. Just
Yeah.
the thought that you're putting into it. Whereas some people are just like the first couple names
Just
they
rip
think of.
off.
Yeah, you feel more responsibility to get it right.
I guess. I
Um,
mean, yeah. I don't know. It's tough.
all right, that's fair. It is a tough question, and like it's like, what are your metrics? Like, can't we just look at profitability? Doesn't anybody have a chart of who's the most profitable? Yeah, but it's a
No,
fun
they do
question.
not.
You get some
It's
interest.
fun.
You get a Major League Baseball All Star saying downside of me is on his list. You know that's the best case scenario. Getting a really fun one like that.
That's awesome.
So I love the question because you get sometimes surprising answers. Always fun. Um, Don G. Donatelli asks, have you ever done sensitivity analysis to estimate the impacts changing the distributions would have on ROI?
Cool question. In a sense, yes, but never. Sort of is the answer.
Okay.
I've looked at some things. Like how much does it matter if I adjust certain things in terms of the distribution I get? So yeah, maybe a little bit informally. I haven't really that question belies a high level of sophistication with which I have not attacked this problem.
Okay.
So I don't want to say too much, but yeah, I know what they're getting at.
Okay.
Sort of, a little is the answer.
Okay. I think that's fair. OA wants to know what is the thinking for the Endgame Syndicate pricing. Do you have any idea what it's going to cost to subscribe?
I do, but I'm not going to say anything in case I'm
You
wildly
haven't
wrong. I
announced
don't
it
want
yet.
to piss anyone off.
Yeah.
We've talked about it. I think we have a rough idea, but I don't want to say anything there.
Do you know if it's going to be like a monthly subscription, annual subscription, anything? Are there going to
My
be
guess,
options?
my guess is monthly, um, but I don't know. I think that probably makes the most sense. Um, we want to provide something that's valuable to people, so it's going to be about balancing like an existing stable of content and then also providing new stuff and balancing that. Um, so we're thinking about those kinds of things. That's all I can
Okay.
say. Yeah, it's being thought about.
Um, so I've made the joke about like why is Adam part of this team? But obviously joking, Adam I've credited many times as being somebody who taught me to be much better at DFS. Just listening to him, obviously a very sharp guy. But I do want to
Well,
talk
you
about like
well,
everybody.
I can address Adam. You posted that, and my first thought was, uh,
Oh, he's going to say something really mean now.
yeah, a little bit mean. No, not really. I mean, we want really good content, right? People want good content, so
Correct.
but we don't want it to be too good. So we have Adam on just to
Yeah,
like
love that.
average it out. No, I mean Adam is he's really strong and he knows how to put out good content and um, we're all good at different bits. I'm more good at engineering-y things. Brick is good at that too, although in a different way. And then, you know, I think it's going to be a good team. There's a lot of stuff we can offer.
As I've said, there aren't that many DFS players out there where I feel like it's worth it to pay a subscription price for access to those DFS players. And I think that this is a group that it's going to be worth it for people to actually pay the price to get in there and have access to the four of you and other people who are rumored to be possibly joining the team. Sounds like it's going to be a very strong team, even if it is just the four of you. So yeah, definitely, I can see the strength of it. I'm just trying to get a concept of like what this is actually going to look like. Because yeah, obviously Adam he's great at content. He's really good at he's a good teacher, I guess is essentially what it comes
Yeah.
down to. He's good at explaining the concepts
Yep.
to people. I feel like Brian definitely is as well. You are as well. I think Utica I don't know as well because all I know him from is two podcast episodes that he's done, so I don't
That's
know
right.
him as well. But he's obviously one like maybe arguably the best DFS player of all time. So I understand why you're
Well,
all there.
look,
I'm just trying to figure out what the roles are going to be. Like how is this actually going to meld together? And I understand you're still kind of trying to figure out what that is going to be. But I guess I'll ask this: are all of you going to be doing content? Are you all going to be doing video content at some point?
yes, we're all going to appear on videos at one point or another, some
Okay.
more than others, and doing different things for sure. But yes, you will see all of us. Um,
Is any of it going to be like slate specific? Like, do you think Adam will do slate breakdowns kind of thing, or like two of you
so
will get on to?
we're talking about that. So I think something like that will be in the mix. But again, we're not trying to be like a replacement for Stochastic or Roto Grinders or any other site like that. Like that's not the goal. Maybe we got there somehow. That would be surprising. It's possible, but that's sort of not. That isn't the animating drive behind this. It's more like we have some unique stuff. We want to share that and us. But yeah, we do anticipate for at least some sports. I mean, it would probably make sense to do slate specific things for football. Like
Right.
I think that I think I can say that's pretty likely to happen. That just seems pretty natural, and but we're not going to be like. I'd be really surprised if we were like at the point of breaking down every NBA slate or every MLB like that would
Okay.
like
You're
that's
not trying
just
to be
not.
that kind of site.
Yeah, we can't do that with four people. Like
Yeah.
that's insane. Like maybe if it was wildly successful and we started adding people, but um, I I think it's really more about the unique things that we have, like the stuff that you don't get somewhere else that we're more likely to focus on.
Okay.
Because you gotta honestly, I mean, just there's a limit to how much money people will pay for subs, right?
Right.
and we we want to have a value proposition where it's like, no, we have something additional and really useful that's not just, another bunch of guys doing similar stuff to another site. Like, but that's not where the value is from us. If that
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was right away when I heard about this, when Brick announced it. My first question was like, are you going to be teaming up with any kind of sim site? And he said no, and I kind of have realized that it's not quite the same thing as like all these other sites. It's going to be kind of its own educational thing, sort of a totally different offering than what we are used to. So as OA here says, let's start a site war. Who will endgame challenge first RPS? But I will. That leads me to the question: do you have an answer to the age-old question, RPS versus Ship It Nation?
I can't. And again, a little bit of, self-diagnostic therapy speak. It's not that I want everyone to like me. It's more that I don't want anyone to hate me. So I think I'm going to pass on that one. Um, there's good people in both of those groups. I'll say that.
Wouldn't
Um,
recommend doing content if you don't want anybody to hate you, because people are going to hate you if you do content. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just, maybe it's not true of everybody, but it is tough. Yeah, that was a good diplomatic answer. Didn't give any kind of answer there. Very
yeah,
sharp.
I don't know if it's sharp, but, cowardly, maybe. I don't know.
I think Adam actually gave a very similar answer. Just yeah, good people on both sides. Good people on both sides. They both have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
sharp people, which is
There
true.
are.
It's a good answer.
I've met people from both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never met. Oh, I gotta be careful how I said this. I've never met anybody working for a site that I didn't like.
Interesting.
I've
So
met
you
a
found
couple of prickly personalities once or twice at a final, but
people
but
who worked at sites, like people that
no,
I would know, or just like ran. Okay,
no, just random good players. Like I can think of two where I was like, yeah, this person's kind of a downer, but
I have
like
also.
everybody's been pretty nice that I've talked to. Um, yeah,
Yeah, for the most part, I feel like at live finals, like you just meet a bunch of people who are, have similar interests to you, and they're generally nice people. Like
yeah,
I've met several people. I've met both Big T and Tambo, and like really enjoyed
yes,
meeting both of them. So yeah, definitely. In general, you go to these live finals, it's not like people being dicks, super competitive to each other. It's
yeah.
usually people who are just going there to have a good time. Yeah, it can be super fun. Well, with that said, OA asked a good question here. Who is the nicest slash coolest person you met at a live final? So, as somebody who doesn't want to upset anybody, you can upset everybody except for one person right now by saying who's the nicest, coolest person you've met at a live final.
That seems like some kind of tremendous negative free roll.
Yeah, yes,
I
it
just
is.
I've enjoyed it. Pretty much everybody I've met. Yeah, there've been a lot of nice people. My concern with these live finals is always, I think you've talked about there's this like open bar problem,
Yeah,
which is that, they have an open bar and by the end of the final, the last day, there's invariably a small collection of people that are just completely hammered, like barely standing. Like literally every final I've been to, this has happened.
huh?
Um, and one time it was me, and I didn't realize it. And I was talking to somebody, and I felt so bad because I was probably just rambling and boring and annoying. And then, like, I've been like drinking and gambling all day, basically, right on the final. And I stood up and like I kind of fell sideways into the wall, and that's when I realized
It
that
was
I
you this
had
time.
rather a lot to drink. Um, but yeah, I haven't had any. I've had a lot of interesting conversations, and it's really fun to meet spouses too. I really enjoy that as well. Um, that's always really interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I've always enjoyed. Actually, I talked with Shady's advice at the last live final. It was
Yeah,
really interesting hearing from her. Like clearly, like really sharp. Also a
yes,
DFS player, kind of a
Devin, sure.
beginning DFS player, but like like really really sharp DFS player. Like she hasn't like gone all in the way he has, but I'm like I feel like you should like just like clearly yeah, that was and several. I met Steve's wife. Actually, I met Steve's wife without Steve was not at the live final for the Fantasy Football World Championship. His wife went. He went to the FanDuel one, so I got to talk with her briefly. She was really cool to meet. But yeah, in general, I've met a lot of spouses. It's been it's always fun to get to know who people are married to. Also, as you're getting to know the DFS player, also agree there. Um, and I'll say this, yeah. The speaking of being super drunk at a live final, I don't think that I've ever been super drunk at a live final, but I did at that Fantasy Football World Championship. I met Jackson Blake, Jay Blake the King, who is like a really great DFS player, and he
Yeah.
told me that we had met at the last one, and I was like, oh shit, maybe I did get super drunk at the last one because I did not remember, of course, and I felt really bad, but then I spent a lot of time with him at the Fantasy Football World Championship, so he clearly didn't hold it against me that I did not remember that we had met previously. So I'm like, maybe I did get too drunk at the last live final also.
I am pathologically bad at remembering names.
I'm not
Or,
usually. I'm generally pretty good. That's why I was like, I must have been drunk at that one.
oh, I'm terrible with names, events. Um, yeah, well, it's all of that mental space is used for programming and music, I guess. I've always been that way. Um, but I always remember faces. I never forget faces though. So I'm like, I
Nice.
know you from
Yeah, I
music,
recognize you from
fantasy,
somewhere.
software, something. Yeah.
OA said that question is for both of us. The who is the nicest, coolest? For me, it is an easy. I can answer this question very simply because Hishbu invited me to a live final
Yeah.
as a guest. So clearly, Hishbu is the goat from that perspective. Really, really, and he really is just an awesome guy. It was really fun
He
hanging out with
certainly
Hishbu.
is.
But I can
I got to
answer
spend
that
a
way.
good bit of time with him too. He's a really, really great dude. I spent a good amount of time with Shady, like you did,
Yeah, Shady's
and
awesome.
Alex. I think those three are the ones I spent the most time with.
I've never actually met Alex in person.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. So
That's
you met
hilarious.
Alex. I never have.
That's
Um,
random. That's so random.
I've told the story before that I met Travis Petty like peak COVID in the middle at the Tournament of Champions. Got seated at the couch next to me, and it was like I was like starstruck meeting Travis Petty. But we became friends that weekend. He's obviously very cool. Yeah, a lot of good people at the live finals. I met several, and there's nobody that I would say like that person is a dick. There are people that I've had like you said, like that I've found to be prickly when I met them, but
Yeah.
that might have been just my interpretation. There's nobody that I'm clearly like I hate that person. Like yeah, generally a cool crowd.
It's much nicer to me than the poker world. I've had a lot of interaction with both. They're just a lot more dicks in the poker world.
That doesn't. I mean, it's more like face to face. Like you're
I think
competing
that's it.
directly.
Yeah, I do think that has something to do with it. And it's definitely more of a thing. Lovely people in the poker world too, by the way.
Yeah,
But yeah, the percentages are worse. I don't. Yeah.
I feel like Brian has talked about that on Lowe's about like he just like hated some of his opponents in poker, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of natural. Just like you directly just beat me, you just took my money, and I don't know. It's a little bit different than DFS, where it's like okay, you won out of this field of 20,000. It's not like us one on one. You took my money. It's like you took everybody's. I don't know. It feels less confrontational in DFS as
Yeah, I
opposed to
think that's
poker, so that
most
might
of
be
it,
it.
honestly. I think so too, yeah. I don't know. I
Um,
hate everybody who beats me on the leaderboard.
on
Like,
Rotogrind, the Rotogrinders leaderboard.
no, just in every contest, I'm like, that guy has to die. That guy, no.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure you're that kind of guy for sure. Just hating everybody. Let me see if I have any. So my end question usually is favorite win-win celebration.
Hmm.
Actually, before we get there, OA did ask. So you say that MLB is the sport you get the most excited about. He asked, is that also the sport that you know the best? And does that factor in for you, like the DFS sport you like being just like a sport that you enjoy at all?
Not really. Only in the sense that it's a clean DFS sport. It has nothing to do with baseball, but
Yeah,
it's like, um, I mean, this shouldn't come as any surprise. I don't think I'm giving anything away here, but like the sports I typically feel most competitive on are the ones where most of what you need is in the data.
yeah,
So like baseball, you have such huge data sets and contrast with something like football where there's a lot of subjectivity, like
Yep.
who's the bell cow today, who, how much are we passing, like
Do we
all these
trust what the
questions.
coach said? Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
so
like this
subjective.
stuff matters. It matters a lot, and I'm no good at that. And so I have to defer on those kinds of things to other people. With baseball, it's like, well, what do you need to know? Well, I mean, once you have the lineup, it's like the weather, the pitch counts for the pitchers, and the pinch hit risk for the batters. Like in terms of subjective things, like that's kind of
Yeah.
it. Like you have everything else. And
Which is also
so,
why, in my opinion, it makes for the worst content. It's just like the least
yeah,
interesting content
like,
to do because it's all just like it's all in the numbers. Just like
yeah,
go
that's
based
right
on the
there.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's why I have more confidence in sports like that.
So that brings up an interesting question that I actually don't remember if I asked you this the last time. Do you consume any DFS content like as you are
I
making
do.
your? Okay.
Yeah, I'll throw on a show before baseball lock. Sometimes I'll make a goofy comment. But partly it's just to like even though I'm data driven, I do feel like it's important to engage at least to some degree in a way that other people do too, to not be a complete alien about it all the time.
Sure.
Um, and also just frankly, like before slate locks, it's just nice to like know that if there's some last minute change, I'm going to hear it
True.
spoken out loud.
Yep.
So that's also part of it. But yeah, I like to engage with people, so and not just be like a little gnome making lineups in a dystopian basement with a ping pong table in the background.
Well,
So
you were, yeah, it does kind of look like a dystopian little background there. I was gonna say, you, as I recall, like you sort of like became, like before you were known as a great DFS player, I feel like you were known as like a guy commenting on Blender streams. Is that like you were a frequent commenter on the streams that Blender did back in,
yeah, when I was
before you
starting,
really got
so
started?
yeah, so the timing worked for me. Like it was right about the time when I would be getting shit ready or doing a workout. So I just throw it on and then I would
Yeah.
talk a lot. I still go on, listen. It's more like he has a lot of good things to say, especially for beginner and intermediate players.
Yeah.
And so this is not meant as a slight at all. I don't listen to it because I think I'm going to learn something anymore. It's more like a habit of like just engaging with what's going on with like it's just good to hear, smart people just talk about stuff, even if
Yeah.
it's stuff you already know. Um, or might go somewhere I hadn't thought of. Like yeah, I don't know how to answer it, but it's almost like a habit. Like I'll
Yeah.
get on the treadmill and throw it on, or
It's
I'll
sort of
like
like you are part of the community. Like it is, a lot of people I think do listen to content as like being part of the community. Also,
yeah,
yeah, I think and like you said, there's a lot of side benefits of like I might just miss like some news piece that comes out if I'm not
yeah,
listening to something. It's good having that like, and that certainly happened for me where it's like I feel like I have an understanding of the slate, and then it's like, oh yeah, because this person is out, and I'm like, wait, what? Like I totally, you can miss things if you aren't paying attention
I know.
sometimes.
I
So
mean, how else would I have known that Scotty Scheffler is, potentially a felon now? So I mean,
exactly, you got to
these
listen
are
to content.
important things to learn.
Yeah.
Actually, that's funny. I had my alarm set and woke up for that slate. I to spare my family, I'll sleep in a different room if there's like a super early golf slate, so I don't wake them up. And living in mountain time, it's like 5 in the morning, or or something. So I got up and I refreshed the news site. I'm like, ah, haha, very funny. This is like some kind of spoof prank thing. I was like completely shocked that it was actually happening. This is like, I mean, I'm no expert on the guy, but seems like the most vanilla milk toast
Oh,
kind
for
of
sure. Yeah.
personality
That
imaginable.
that is. I'm also no expert, but that is also my impression of just
And
like
we're like, we're
this is
booking this
not.
guy? What is
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah. Pretty
So that
insane.
was pretty funny.
Wait. Let me just take a step back though. Did you just say that you like every PGA slate you sleep in a different room from your wife because you're going to get up early to run your PGA stuff? Like how
If
often
it's
is that
early enough.
necessary for PGA? Like, isn't it
Um,
usually like the night before? Like, how often is that necessary, do you think?
the problem is injuries.
For
So
PGA though,
injury.
it's like okay.
The thing is though, it's so frustrating because the reporting is shit. So
Yeah.
sometimes you don't get it anyway. But like, and it doesn't happen that often that you have actionable data half an hour before lock. But when it does happen, it's a big fucking deal,
True.
EV
Huge hit.
wise.
Yep.
So it's like, God damn it. It's like sometimes, I think, golf has gotten tougher. Um, at least for me, my edge is definitely down in golf, like a lot. Um, so I'll often do slates opportunistically. I'm like, okay, I'll sleep in the basement, and if I wake up in time to make it, I'll enter lineups. Otherwise, I'm just not going to play. So this is what happens when you get older, Neil. I'll be 50 in December.
No way.
So
You
yeah,
did tell me when I invited you on the show, you told me I am more than double the age of your last guest.
yeah, that is
Um,
correct. Um,
yeah, that's I just like to me that's for a PGA, so for a more casual PGA player like myself, and
yeah,
I definitely am a negative EV PGA player, or at least my results would say I'm horrible at PGA DFS. But it's more like I will occasionally I'll set an alarm for like 15 minutes before lock just to see like okay if somebody's out I can just like global swap onto somebody else is
yeah.
more like my process. But is it do you think that like the margins are so thin for PGA that like you can't just do that like it's going to affect ownership and stuff so you want to
You know,
really
maybe your thing is more sensible. Like it's clearly not optimal, but maybe it's good enough to do it that way, and then just you're eating a little bit when it
right.
happens, but it's not so terrible. Honestly, I'm just so obsessive. It's like I have to like do my whole process, or like I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
But
And when
sometimes I wake up early and there's a little bit of overlay. Like I want
yeah.
a round one golf ticket. I think it's you got to get to round three to make it because there was last minute overlay on a contest and it was rake free, and so I'm like, yeah, I don't know if my edge is there with full rake, but I definitely have an edge if there's no rake.
Yeah.
So I entered and I won a ticket. So
That's worth it then. Yeah.
sometimes good things happen, yeah. But
Yeah.
but yeah, golf is tough.
You may also find, by the way, just a little bit of alpha for you. Check underdog on those mornings because
Uh-uh.
sometimes you'll get like 70%
Massive.
filled. Yeah, like there's just like
Yeah.
way huge overlay on those mornings. Um,
I
so
have played some underdog PGA because it is the simplest thing to model
yeah,
imaginable,
is
right?
it
From
because there's
a
no
best ball
correlation or anything? It's just yeah,
Yeah, so it's really just modeling the drafting and the frequency, and then like, can it figure out when to reach and when to randomize and when not to randomize? Like,
yeah.
how many picks can I pass up Colin Morikawa on? These kinds of things. Um, so yeah, I've dabbled.
As somebody who doesn't do my own projections, like I try to like, okay, well, if I just set like ranks and then I look through like projections and I look at various, it's like, okay, for a single round, it's like the difference of projections for these 20 golfers is like zero point 0.1 fantasy points. So then
That's it.
it's just like, I guess I'll play the combinatorial ownership game of just like, probably this golfer is going to be with this golfer less frequently. And that's kind of all it seems to be as far as I can tell.
Neil, I think you just solved golf drafts. I think that's exactly it. I mean, you just look at the if you just it's very different from DFS without salaries, right? Because we care about points per dollar.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, once you get past the first few elite performers, like
Yeah.
they're like basically interchangeable. I mean, just don't draft. It feels like I don't know if this is true. I haven't studied it, but just it feels like just don't draft whatever ADP everyone is using, and you just that has to be good, right?
Yeah.
Feels
The
like
funny thing
it.
is, so for me, I try to do it before bed, and there have been a couple times where it's like, okay, I set my ranks, and then I just fall, like I enter 20 drafts, and they take
Huh?
so long to fill at 2 a.m. that it's just
Yeah,
like I fall asleep, and then I end up with five of the same lineup, and it's like, oh, this is the worst possible thing I could have done. Um, but yeah, in theory, I try to do that. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's it. Yeah,
Don says, yeah, he's saying, please stay off underdog. I agree with Don. Just stay away from underdog. Come on,
dude, I've
let us have
lost.
something.
I've lost like $2,000 on underdog so far testing my crap. So you're just feasting off of my negative 70% ROI or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
No,
All
it's
right.
true.
No, nobody buys that. I want to be clear. Nobody
It's
buys that.
true.
Yeah, so far off a very, clearly a very
100%.
small sample size. Yeah, that'll change. Um, wait, how negative EV is drafting underdog this early on? I don't know what
I
you mean,
assume he's
OA.
asking about like BBM5, like drafting
Oh, okay, yeah,
football
that would make
now.
sense.
I'm not the guy to ask this. Neil, you know better than I do. You should take that one.
So I don't know that we have the data there. I think there are different opinions on like, the barbell approach. Some people would say you get more of an advantage drafting now. So like some people would say draft now and then draft now for the unknowns, take advantage of them. I will say my personal experience is I've had a lot more success with drafts closer to the season when I have the most information possible.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you can get teams now that you're not going to be able to get in August. So I would think that it actually is probably negative EV drafting right now,
So that's
for
my
most of us.
intuition as well, and I'll lay out my thought process. You can poke some holes in it. So the first thing is like the theory of drafting early, as I understand it, is like if you're sharp about football and how teams get new players, and you could get somebody, you know, in round 16 that turns out to be round 6,
Yeah,
right? That's the value proposition as I understand it.
yeah,
The problem is, unfortunately, you have to draft a whole team also. And
right.
so it just always seemed to me that the cost of all the other mistakes you're inevitably going to make from lack of information are just going to dwarf the edge you get from, well, I actually knew something and I got a lot of this guy like way later than I should have. Like you're just going to lose that and more by screwing up everything else through
Yeah.
no fault of your own, just because nobody knows. You know what I'm saying? Oh,
I think that you're probably right, and there might be people who are so good at like being able to anticipate the news that like it's plus EV to draft the guys now who are going to be like, if you can get three of those guys who are going to be 6 rounds later in the last 3 rounds, then maybe it's worth it. But and I say this as somebody who has already done like 30 best ball mania drafts, because I'm streaming them all.
I
So
know.
it's tough because it's like, but I do think like probably the best time to draft is right before the season. I think that probably makes the most sense. I think I agree with you that that is probably just like for the majority of us, like yeah, just having the most information possible. Also, casual drafters come in at that point, so like
That's
there's
what
a
I was
lot
going to
of
bring up next. Like
yeah,
if you draft early, it's like guess what? There are lots of other sharp guys in there who also might know the same thing that you know,
yeah,
and are going to vulture some of your EV because those are exactly the kinds of players who want to play early. Whereas you play
yeah,
late, like I played late drafts on DraftKings because my rep gave me like $7-10 tickets.
nice.
How many people are just, I mean, just terrible at drafting at the last minute, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially like you said, they give tickets away. So like when they're
Yeah,
throwing tickets at everybody, like you get people drafting a 16th round player in the third round. Like it's just like people
yeah,
have
it's
no
like I'm going to
idea.
get my fourth quarterback now, and
Yeah.
yep.
And Don says, I think that's negated partially by the fact that it's pod based. It's negated for the regular season.
Uh,
yes, partially negated, but also like
uh,
then you get to the playoffs and you get to the playoffs against people who have drafted closer to the season. So yeah, partially negated I think is the correct way to say that.
uh-huh.
Um,
Interesting.
Inkle says strength of teams in the later months is higher, but a lot of people have to start drafting early. I mean, that is also true. If you're trying to do 150, like it's tough to do them all in August. See myself drafting
Well,
30
okay.
so far.
For you, Neil, I get it. you're doing it for content as part of the
Right.
deal, but like, what are most people doing it for? Like to say they did 150? I mean, like, if you love to do it and then you love the game, I mean, that's great. But like, doing 150 for the sake of doing 150 is,
You get a cactus out of it from
oh,
Underdog.
nice. That's awesome.
Um, I mean, I think a lot of people do just love doing it. I will say
Yeah,
so.
that makes sense to me. I get that.
I will add this in in favor of drafting early. I do think that the reps matter. Like getting a lot of reps in does matter. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, if you're not going to be able to do 150 starting on August 20th, like I think starting early makes sense to
Uh-huh.
for the purpose of making your later team stronger, because then you have an idea of like, okay, what is the range that this player can be drafted in? Like, is it, oh, this player is 20 picks past ADP, like that's awesome, I need to take him, versus, well, he falls 20 picks past ADP all the time. Being able to reverse engineer your draft. So I do think that there
Uh-huh.
are benefits to it, even though like on an individual team basis, I think it makes, you're going to draft your best teams at the end. Does
That's
that make
interesting.
sense?
That makes sense to me. And plus, you're gonna build intuition about how certain kinds of drafters behave, probably, which
Yeah.
could be really useful. It's like the kind of guy that's taking this guy, like he's also going to do these kinds of things, and I don't need to rush to get this player because that those kinds of I could see how that could be a thing.
Yeah. That drafter just took an unstacked CJ Stroud. He's probably going to make a lot of irrational decisions throughout the draft.
Right.
Yeah,
So
you could definitely
so
pick
I
up on
better
those
not
things.
I better not stack the team that he's likely to vulture or because of
Yeah.
the ADP of the players in the stack or something. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, there's definitely, it's definitely, you can learn a lot from drafting early, even if, yeah, it's probably not the best from a like individual lineup EV standpoint. I think like for your portfolio, doing some drafts early makes sense. Um, all right, I think yeah, also memorizing the playoff schedule, that is true. That can be helpful. Um, I think that we have finished all of our questions. I think I told you before we started, we're going to try to get to 1 to 2 hours, and we are now over 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's
And
the
it's
nerdy
been,
disease. All of the podcasts I'm on, they run too long.
I mean,
It's,
it's because you're an interesting guest, and like we have a lot of questions for you. I wouldn't call it rambling. I think that you give good, longer answers, and it's much appreciated, I would say.
oh,
Um,
it's fun.
Jewish McCaffrey does want to know if you were part of the Alex Baker Professional Ping Pong League.
No, my wife and my 17-year-old son are the principal ping pong players. And it's fun. Sometimes I'll be down here like um, working lineups or whatever, because oftentimes it's around that time they want to play. There's lots of yelling and cursing, and I'm blasting music, and ping pong balls are hitting me, and it's a fun time.
Looks like a fun time, and you have no need to decorate those walls at all. I think that this looks like a really just fun basement. You just look at that basement and you think, yeah, you're gonna have fun in that basement. I'm not being facetious at all. That just like for audio listeners, it's just looks like a big cement room with like nothing in it other than a ping pong table and something in the corner. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, I would describe it as like maybe part of a level from a first-person shooter from like the early '90s.
Yeah.
So
Spot
like
on, spot
a
on.
zombie is going to come around the corner, and you just shoot it before it infects you or something.
Yeah. But you have fun in it by playing ping pong. Is it cement? Am I correct that those are cement walls, or is it?
No, it's just
Okay.
this little facade. It's this super thin
Okay. I was
fake.
wondering, as I'm looking closer, it looks like there might be.
It's
Okay.
it's
I see.
very 1970s, even though this house was made in the '80s. It's the rest of the house is a little nicer.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks like it's serving its purpose for sure, just like a basement should. It's just serving the purpose that you need it for. All right. So before I ask my finishing question, I will ask this. Jewish McCaffrey, did we already discuss what pushed him to get into Underdog? I think he just recently joined. Feel free to ignore. I don't think that you've answered. What did push you? I
No,
mean, you kind of
I
have, but
think it was just really interesting to me as a game, and I wanted to see. I finally had an insight on how to approach it from an engineering perspective. Um, and I just was like, let's see what I can do. Um, it's really as simple as that. And then Underdog's just been sort of a laboratory where I donate money and see what my software is actually trying to do.
Donate money
Yeah.
for, I think we can all anticipate, donate money for a very, very short term.
Well,
But we,
I don't know. It is a really interesting problem. I think drafting is fascinating. There's so many fascinating pieces. I'm really excited to get into that. So I mean, I'm gonna do all this DFS toy game content, but I'm really excited to do later when I think my software is more mature to get into the drafting version of that. It's gonna be really interesting. Like
yeah,
there's
that
so
will be
many
fascinating.
questions. Like just listening as an amateur to people like you and Eric Beimfor and
Pete Overzet.
Pete. Yeah, Pete. This is the name I couldn't call to mind for God's sakes. Just talk about these kinds of questions and intuitions. I'm like, that's something I want to explore. Like that question, like, um, that's really exciting to me. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a little bit later, I'm guessing, but definitely
I,
excited to get in there.
as somebody who is basically an intuition player, I always love hearing from people that like actually dig into the data of like, oh, like my intuition was correct, or oh, I was way off on that intuition. Yeah, it's always fascinating having those conversations with people who have dug into the data all the time. Speaking like talking about like stacks early on in MLB underdog, I'm like, yeah, I feel like people are understacking, but like sounds like maybe that's not exactly what you found. Yeah,
I'm not
it's always
sure.
fascinating. Yeah. All
TBD.
right. All right, so we're gonna make it for we're almost at 2.5 hours. I will ask my final question now, the
Very
one that
good.
I always like to ask. Can you tell me about your favorite win and or win celebration?
Probably that would be the one. Okay. There are
You can do
two.
you can do multiple.
Okay,
Yeah,
there are two.
tell me both
The,
of them.
the one that was the most fun celebration was after the hockey final, which involved lots of drinking and then playing Top Shots golf, which I had never played before, and I did really well, which is kind
Nice.
of ironic. And but probably my favorite one was the one at Tournament of Champions. It wasn't a win; it was second place, but just because my dad and stepmom were there, and they hand out these giant checks for first, second, and third,
Oh
and I
no
couldn't
way.
take
Oh
them,
yeah,
so I gave them the giant check, and then it's in their closet somewhere. So that was pretty fun.
that's really fun getting the
Yeah,
giant check.
yeah,
So
definitely.
wait, so it was the tournament champs. Sorry, what was the other one? It was the
The hockey one was
oh
first.
the hockey. So it was both like in the past year.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
Or
not the five hundred
hockey
fifty
was.
thousand dollar win. I guess that one you had to give most of it to your backer at that point, so that
Oh no,
was
no.
fun.
Well, no. The backer, the biggest one was the one, and that was definitely not my most favorite.
Okay,
Was when I had my backer, and I because it has caused innumerable accounting and tax issues,
yeah,
which I am still working through. So the combination of gambling and international tax law is not something I would wish on my worst enemy. It'll
yeah.
get
That doesn't
it's
sound fun.
yeah. I won't bore you with the details, but it'll take them forever to resolve it, but it will get resolved. I
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Well,
It's
this was really really good conversation, Daniel. Really appreciated you coming on the stream. I feel like we learned quite a lot. But I have to ask you, where can people find you? Because now I mean, you're going to be doing content. So where can they find you? Where can they find your content?
We'll be at Endgame Syndicate shortly. Probably matter of we're talking weeks, and then at nerdytenor on Twitter. Um, and yeah, we'll see you there.
Go to endgamesyndicate.com. There is a, you can put your email in to get notified when the site does launch. So yeah, if you want to go like be prepared for when it comes out, go to endgamesyndicate.com, put your email address in there to get notified when the site goes live. At nerdytenor on Twitter. Really fun conversation. Really appreciate Daniel coming on to be my guest on one of these shows for the
Oh, it was fun.
second time for a combined 5 hours now, maybe four. I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a lot of fun both times. And thank you all for hanging out with us while we had this conversation. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, rate, review on podcast form, etc., etc. Really appreciate you all. Thank you very much. Catch you next time.